Hey guys, tonight we're unmasking the man the world called the Asian El Chapo. Picture this: a cold Dutch detention cell, sterile white walls, humming with fluorescent fatigue, and seated calmly at its center is Tse Chi Lop. No handcuffs rattling, no shouting. Just a man who built one of the most sophisticated narcotics syndicates in modern history. Quietly. The air around him carries the weight of billions. Billions in meth, ketamine, ecstasy, and laundered dollars. And yet, he barely blinks. If you're expecting a raging Don with scars and gold chains, think again. This is a man who made silence louder than gunfire, who treated borders like suggestions, and who may have orchestrated more underworld deals than most people send text messages in a year. You probably wouldn't survive even a week in his shoes. Not because you'd get shot, but because the silence, the secrets, and the sheer scale of control would drown you faster than bullets ever could. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's January 22nd, 2021, and the Schiphol airport near Amsterdam is its usual industrial ballet of movement. Flights coming in, passport scanners blinking, coffee cups trembling on plastic trays. But one flight draws more eyes than others, not from the public, but from shadows, agents from Interpol and Dutch law enforcement. They move like stage hands, black coats, murmurs in earpieces, standing by at customs, and there he is, Tse Chi Lop. No entourage, just a single carry-on bag, hoodie drawn loosely over his head, the outline of someone who wouldn't warrant a second glance in the line at a taxi stand. He's 57 now, aging into his cheeks, but still maintains that soft-spoken, unreadable presence that has baffled investigators for decades. He doesn't argue when approached, doesn't ask questions, as if he already knew this moment was coming. The arrest is quick, smooth, bloodless, but this is no ordinary criminal. Tse Chi Lop has been linked to a drug syndicate responsible for up to 70% of all methamphetamine in Asia-Pacific markets. That's more meth than Pablo Escobar ever pushed in cocaine, statistically speaking. His organization, referred to by law enforcement as Sam Gor, has been called the most prolific drug trafficking syndicate in the world. And yet, most people outside of a few police task forces have never heard his name. For Tse, this is just another airport. Another checkpoint in a life built on evasion and shadows. But to understand why this arrest feels so seismic, we need to step back. Way back. Before the meth labs, before the Interpol notices, before the name Sam Gor ever landed in a confidential dossier. We go now to 1970s Guangzhou, China, where Tse Chi Lop's story begins not with wealth or violence, but with hunger. Guangdong, back then, is still recovering from the Cultural Revolution's scars. Tse is born into a working-class family in a city where meals are modest and futures uncertain. His family, like many others, considers escape a form of survival. Tse learns young what scarcity tastes like. Measured bowls of rice, hand-me-down shirts, the sound of adult whispers about money. There's a certain gaze he learns early. How to look at a man and see what he's hiding, not what he's saying. It would serve him well in the years to come. When he's a teenager, his family leaves China behind, swept into the tide of immigration that leads them to Toronto, Canada. For many, this would be a chance to start anew. For Tse, it's a chance to observe. Toronto's Chinatown in the 1980s is a colorful clash of tradition and urban opportunity. Behind the hanging ducks and steamed windows and the herbal stores, there are dice games, underground card rooms, and crews with names like Whispers, big circle boys among them. By the time Tse is in his 20s, he's already found a niche. He isn't the muscle. He's not flashy. But he's watching, memorizing who gets paid, who makes decisions, and, most importantly, who gets away with things. One man remembers him as the guy who never raised his voice, but people listened when he spoke. That tells you everything. Big circle boys, descendants of former Red Guards exiled after the Maoist revolution, aren't your average street gang. They're structured, disciplined, and international. They speak in Cantonese codes, move drugs across continents, and respect silence over noise. Tse doesn't jump ahead. He rises slowly. But he learns early that violence leaves footprints. Money doesn't. His early rackets include small gambling setups, credit fraud, and low-risk narcotics. Nothing big enough to trigger Interpol, but lucrative enough to earn trust. And trust is everything. Many people still think that his rise was pure luck. Wrong place. Right time. But what do you think? A guy who ran a multi-billion-dollar empire by 2020 didn't just fall into it, right? Back in Canada, Tse keeps a low profile, lives in a modest home, travels on commercial flights. He's seen at weddings, family gatherings, and community events, but never at the center. Always a bit off to the side, smiling, listening. By the mid-1990s, authorities begin to whisper about the Asian connection in drug pipelines flowing into North America. But names like Tse's don't come up often. He's too clean, too careful. And while the rest of the world chases flashy dons and turf wars, Tse is already thinking globally. He sees the coming wave, the synthetic drug revolution. No longer will crime syndicates need fields of coca leaves or poppy harvests. Just chemistry and control, and he's already positioning himself for it. His next step? Southeast Asia. The old heroin routes will soon become the new meth highways, and Tse Chi Lop will be waiting. Guangzhou, 1963. The city hums with the clatter of bicycles, the hiss of kettles, and the soft groan of a nation trying to stretch itself awake after years of revolutionary fever. Tse Chi Lop is born into this world, not into opulence or privilege, but into the daily choreography of survival. His family shares a cramped apartment in a concrete block, one of many erected in haste during Maoist planning. There's no luxury here, only rhythm. Early mornings, ration lines, whispered conversations behind closed doors. His parents are quiet people. His father works long shifts in a textile mill, his hands always calloused, always busy. His mother tends to the home with a mixture of warmth and weary calculation, counting eggs like coins, repairing the same socks until the cotton gives up. There's no outright abuse, no broken glass or shouting matches. But there's also no softness. Tse learns early that love is measured in sacrifice, not sentiment. During his earliest years, the Cultural Revolution casts its long shadow over China. Schools are disrupted, books are burned. Even young children, like Tse, grow up with the faint sense that information is dangerous, that knowing too much or asking the wrong questions might bring trouble. So Tse doesn't ask, he observes. He watches how neighbors navigate the government, how merchants stretch rules, how whispers in alleyways carry more weight than speeches in the square. His greatest gift emerges here, a talent for reading silence and food, always food. The scarcity imprints him. He remembers the thud of potatoes into a metal bowl, the steam rising off thin rice congee, the feel of his stomach clenching before sleep. Hunger becomes not just a physical sensation, but a kind of lesson. It teaches discipline. It teaches patience. And later, it would teach him to never trust comfort too long. In 1974, when Tse is around 11, the family begins preparing to leave. Not legally, not with parades or state approvals, just quiet steps toward the unknown. His uncle has already made it to Hong Kong, and through a long chain of favors and hidden channels, they arrange the crossing. It takes months. Bribes, boat rides, forged papers. Tse doesn't understand every detail, but he senses the fear behind his father's eyes as they pack. And then, one humid night, they go. They land briefly in Hong Kong, still under British rule, chaotic and buzzing with neon commerce. It's a city on fast forward compared to Guangzhou. Here, Tse gets his first taste of capitalism in its rawest form. Men shouting over dice, boys hawking cigarettes outside electronics stalls, bankers rubbing shoulders with smugglers at rooftop bars. He doesn't stay long, but the city leaves a mark. Fast money, fast deals, everything negotiable. Soon after, they emigrate again, this time with proper documents, to Canada. Toronto becomes home. The air is colder, the streets wider, the rules tighter. But under the surface, familiar currents remain. The family joins the growing Chinese immigrant community in Scarborough, a neighborhood of strip malls, basement apartments, and tangled loyalties. Tse begins school. His English is basic, but functional. He's not bullied. He's too unreadable for that. But he's not exactly embraced either. Teachers note that he's quiet, rarely raises his hand, and never seems surprised. By 15, he's already drifting toward other outsiders, sons of immigrants, boys with secondhand sneakers and first-world ambitions. He gets a part-time job delivering takeout, long drives through icy nights, plastic bags of sweet and sour chicken steaming up the car windows. But he's also listening, watching which houses tip big, which diners accept cash only, which storefronts close earlier than posted. At 17, he meets someone who will change the course of his life, a young man named Denny, already connected to Chinatown's underground world. Denny isn't loud. He's clever, charming, and always wearing a leather jacket with pockets that never seem to hold just keys. He introduces Tse to the backroom economy of Chinese Canada, gambling dens, unlicensed nightclubs, and credit scams. Tse doesn't jump in. He hovers at the edge, carries messages, offers rides, keeps his ears open. And Denny notices. "You're like a cat," he says once, half joking. "You walk in without making noise, and I still end up telling you too much." One night, Tse is asked to help run a simple delivery. No drugs, just money. A bag from a mahjong parlor on Spadina Avenue to a karaoke lounge in North York. No cops, no drama, and it goes smoothly. After that, more deliveries follow. Sometimes envelopes, sometimes small bricks, vacuum sealed. He never opens them. He never asks. What matters is that he's proving himself. Dependable, invisible. By the early 1980s, Tse is a familiar face in Toronto's Big Circle Boys network. Born from former Red Guards exiled after the Maoist purges, the Big Circle Boys operate differently from traditional triads. They don't wear tattoos or demand oaths of loyalty. They operate like a shadow business, with hierarchies that flex across borders and functions that range from drug smuggling to investment fraud. Tse doesn't climb fast, he climbs smart. And here's where the first big debate comes in. Many people still think that Tse was recruited by accident, that he was merely a low-level helper who got lucky when his seniors were arrested or deported. But others believe he was chosen early, that his calm, calculating nature made him an ideal planner, even in his youth. So what do you think? Was Tse a placeholder? Or was he already quietly steering the ship? Whatever the case, by his mid-20s, Tse is making money, real money, not flashy but steady. He still lives with his family for a while, helps with bills, attends Sunday dinners, but his eyes are already looking east, toward Asia, where the drug market is changing faster than the Canadian snow can melt. The methamphetamine boom is coming. Unlike heroin, which requires opium poppies and sensitive roots, meth can be made anywhere with the right chemicals and know-how. And unlike cocaine, it's cheaper to produce, longer lasting, and increasingly popular among working-class users in Japan, South Korea, and Australia. And while the world is still focused on Colombian cartels and Miami smugglers, Tse is already gathering contacts in Southeast Asia. It starts with whispers, a lab in northern Myanmar, guarded by armed men, a chemist from Taiwan looking for backers, a shipment of ephedrine rerouted through Bangkok. Tse funds part of it, not all, just enough to signal trust, and it works. The lab produces over 700 kilos in a month. Purity, 98%. Profit margin, astronomical. And just like that, the real journey begins. Toronto fades behind him like frost on a rearview mirror. By the late 1980s, Tse Chi Lop is flying more often, not just across provinces, but across oceans. Hong Kong, Bangkok, Taipei, Kuala Lumpur. Always on commercial flights, always with clean papers. He travels light. No entourage, just a nondescript suitcase and that signature calm. A man moving through the world like it owes him no favors and asks no questions. By now, he's more than just a name in the big circle boys. He's a connector, a broker of trust between factions that don't usually sit at the same table. He's not flashy, and he's not territorial. That alone makes him stand out in an underworld often obsessed with face and violence. Tse doesn't need people to fear him. He needs them to underestimate him. In Bangkok, he meets an ex-triad chemist named Uncle Tan, known in whispers for setting up mobile labs in the jungle using little more than barrels, blueprints, and solar panels. Tse listens as the old man explains the logistics of turning raw chemicals into crystalline meth under banana leaves and mosquito nets. The numbers are dizzying. One shipment from the lab to southern Thailand, then to Malaysia, then out via shipping containers masked as tea or green beans. She asks only one question. Can it scale? Uncle Tan grins. If you want a lab that feeds a village, I can give you 3. Back in Canada, local news is catching wind of a mysterious surge in Asian drug connections, but they're still using phrases like triad turf wars and Hong Kong mafia, too stuck in the old template. No one's using words like global syndicate or multinational crime consortium. But that's what's forming beneath their feet. Tse doesn't start wars, he draws maps. His greatest talent is noticing where things don't connect, and then becoming the link. He's building a spider web, stretching from Chinese expats in Vancouver to shipyard bosses in Malaysia, to logistics managers in Singapore, to meth cooks in Shan State, Myanmar. Here's a historical nugget for you. In the early 1990s, the Golden Triangle, the border region where Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand meet, produced more than half the world's heroin. It was lawless, lush, and lucrative. But as heroin demand began to shift, the real visionaries saw another opportunity: synthetics. Methamphetamine was cleaner, quicker, and required fewer middlemen. Tse was one of the first to bet on it. He travels to Laos under a different name, meets with a militia-backed faction protecting a new lab. He offers money, logistics, and most importantly, buyers. His contacts in Australia are begging for product. Japanese crime families want in. Even some South Korean syndicates send feelers. Tse doesn't boast. He just connects the lines. Soon, he's in Hong Kong, setting up shell companies with names like Pacific Import Holdings or Everlight Logistics. These fronts handle nothing but paperwork, fake bills of lading, customs declarations, and invoices that make narcotics look like industrial chemicals. He rents a modest office in Central, hires a staff who never meets him in person. Everything is filtered through layers, proxies, intermediaries, plausible deniability. It's all boring on the surface. Accounting, shipping schedules, cargo tracking. But hidden between the lines are tons, literal tons, of methamphetamine. In Malaysia, he forms a quiet alliance with a syndicate already trafficking ketamine and party drugs. They have the distribution. He has the supply. Within 6 months, warehouses near Port Klang are filled with boxes no one dares open. And back in Toronto, his name barely comes up. Many people still think that Tse left Canada behind permanently in the 90s, but that's not entirely true. Some reports suggest he returned quietly several times under alternate identities, possibly to manage investments or launder profits through real estate. But nothing was ever proven. So what do you think? Did he ever really leave Toronto? Or did Toronto just stop seeing him? One man who knew him during this time recalled, "He looked like a businessman, always neat, carried himself like someone who'd never been in a fight, but who'd still win one." By the mid-1990s, Tse's influence stretches across 5 countries, none of which officially list him as wanted. His name is absent from watch lists. His businesses are boring on paper, and his product, better than anything the market's ever seen. Enter Australia. Down under, methamphetamine use is climbing, and not just among inner-city users. It's spreading to suburban families, truck drivers, miners, night shift workers. The purity is higher. The effects are longer. The addiction, more devastating. And guess who's supplying it? Tse doesn't step foot in Sydney or Melbourne. He doesn't need to. His network handles everything, from import to inland transport to street distribution. He simply oversees the math, and the math is absurd. A single shipment that costs $10 million to produce brings in over $80 million in street value. That's cartel-level profit, without a single bullet fired. At one point, one of his associates jokes, "Tse's only weapon is a spreadsheet." But let's not mistake calm for weakness. In 1998, Tse is arrested in the United States for his role in a multi-million-dollar heroin operation. He's extradited and ends up serving 9 years in a U.S. federal prison. That's a hard pause in his rise. And yet, even behind bars, he doesn't crack, he doesn't talk, and he doesn't vanish. Some say he used the time to reimagine his model. Others believe he was already laying groundwork from inside. A letter sent, a lawyer instructed. A quiet nod during a prison visit. When he's released in 2006, Tse doesn't come back with revenge in mind. He comes back with a blueprint, and that blueprint would become Sam Gor. Tse Chi Lop steps out of prison not with the gait of a man broken, but with the measured calm of someone who had simply pressed pause. The years in a U.S. federal facility haven't aged him so much as they've refined him. He's leaner, quieter, more deliberate. There's no press conference, no reunion parade, just a series of unannounced reappearances in cities that always seem one flight apart. He doesn't rush back into the game. That would be reckless. Instead, He spends months off the radar, observing, testing waters, visiting old friends in Hong Kong, Macau, Kuala Lumpur, places where his name was once a whisper and now a myth. The heroin world has changed since his sentencing. The dominance of Colombian cartels has wavered. The Taliban is muscling back into Afghanistan's opium fields. But most importantly, synthetic drugs have surged. Meth is king. And Southeast Asia, it's the new throne. This time, Tse doesn't rebuild the old empire. He creates a conglomerate. He starts reaching out, not with orders, but with proposals. Instead of rivalries, he offers partnerships. Instead of turf wars, he offers spreadsheets and stable profits. The idea is radical in its simplicity. Unify 5 major triads and syndicates into one cooperative structure. Each retains its identity and region, but together they share routes, labs, suppliers, and finances. And just like that, Sam Gor is born. Let's pause there. The name Sam Gor isn't Tse's invention. Law enforcement agencies coined it, Cantonese for brother number 3, based on coded chatter and intercepted calls. No one really knows why. Some say Tse was referred to that way by subordinates. Others believe it's just a placeholder that stuck. So what do you think? Was Tse always number 3? Or was he always number 1 behind the curtain? The organization becomes a mosaic of crime families. 14K Triad, Wo Xing Wo, Sun Yi On, Vietnamese gangs, even some Yakuza affiliates. It's not a cartel in the traditional sense. It's more like a multinational enterprise, decentralized, efficient, and terrifyingly quiet. Tse, as always, stays in the shadows. He uses Hong Kong as a coordination point, Cambodia as a soft landing base, Myanmar for production, Taiwan for logistics, Australia for distribution. He doesn't micromanage, but he signs off on critical moves. His associates handle deals with shipping companies, corrupt border officials, and chemical suppliers. One man oversees security, another handles bribes, another watches banking channels. It's a boardroom, not a bunker, and Tse is the quiet CEO. Here's a concrete historical fact. By 2018, UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, reports that Southeast Asia is experiencing a record surge in synthetic drug seizures. Methamphetamine pills, crystal meth, ketamine, all moving with surgical coordination. The estimated value of the meth market alone is pegged at $61 billion annually. Authorities begin to realize that this is not the work of scattered gangs. It's something bigger. Meanwhile, Sam Gor avoids attention by flooding markets with low-purity, high-frequency shipments. Instead of massive hauls that trigger alarms, they move constant, medium-sized loads. Boats, trucks, air freight, even legal cargo ships, all filled with hollowed-out electronics, shampoo bottles, frozen fish, each carrying a sliver of product that adds up to mountains. And unlike Latin American cartels, Sam Gor doesn't decorate social media with violence or bravado. No beheadings, no gold-plated AK-47s, just silence. The kind that terrifies investigators more than screams ever could. Tse is rarely seen. When he travels, it's on clean passports, at least 4 known identities, often linked to Taiwan or Hong Kong. Sometimes he's in casual tourist wear, other times in tailored suits. Always polite, always disappearing before cameras can find him. In one now infamous moment in 2017, he reportedly attends a birthday party at a luxury hotel in Macau, hosted by a high-ranking 14K boss. The champagne flows, the casino glows. Tse? He arrives through a side entrance. No fanfare. Security footage shows him exchanging hugs and soft laughter with guests, then slipping away long before sunrise. No one photographs him, but everyone remembers he was there. His methods set a new tone for Asian organized crime. He doesn't own nightclubs. He doesn't flaunt cars. He invests in legitimate businesses, import-export firms, logistics companies, packaging manufacturers. Each becomes a node in the wider web. Layers upon layers. Many people still believe that Tse's real genius wasn't drugs, it was logistics. That he was less kingpin and more Jeff Bezos with better disguises. What do you think? Can you run a drug empire with fewer guns than spreadsheets? One customs official in New Zealand once said, "It's like playing chess with fog. You know the pieces are out there. You just can't see them until they're already scoring points." And speaking of fog, Cho's money moves like vapor. Hong Kong real estate, Macanese casinos, offshore trusts, shell corporations in the British Virgin Islands. A law firm in Singapore handles most of the paperwork, its partners blissfully unaware or willfully ignorant of their client's true identity. He even dabbles in philanthropy, a small donation to a cancer center, a quiet scholarship for underprivileged kids in Guangzhou. Moves so soft, they might seem human, but don't get it twisted. Behind every polite gesture is a machine built for profit. And as 2018 rolls around, that machine is humming. Interpol begins to connect the dots. Seizures in Sydney, confiscated containers in Jakarta. A bust in Laos reveals a shipment linked to Sam Gor. Forensic accountants trace wire transfers back to holding companies tied indirectly to Tse. And finally, one name rises through the clutter: Tse Chi Lop. Until now, he's never been mentioned publicly. But in 2019, the UNODC makes a bold move. In a press briefing, they named Tse as the alleged leader of the Sam Gor syndicate. The world tilts. For the first time, this ghost has a name, and the chase begins. By the time Tse Chi Lop's name hits the press in 2019, his empire has already seeped into the bloodstream of half a continent. But what the public hears for the first time, the manhunt, the myth, the billionaire drug lord dubbed Asia's El Chapo, law enforcement agencies have been whispering behind closed doors for years. The Australian Federal Police, AFP, in particular, have been watching closely. In Sydney and Melbourne, crystal meth, locally known as ice, is ravaging communities. Not just in dark alleyways or grungy apartments, but in quiet suburbs and regional towns. Teachers, nurses, tradies, even students are getting swept under. The purity is too high, the volume too relentless. This isn't the work of small-time cook-ups or backyard dealers. This is industrial, global, systematic. And so, the AFP partners with dozens of other agencies: New Zealand, Canada, the US DEA, Europol, Interpol. Together, they form Operation Kungur, a multinational task force with one goal: dismantle Sam Gor and bring Tse to justice. But here's the problem. Tse doesn't behave like a drug lord. He doesn't call the shots from a jungle compound. He doesn't ride in armored convoys. He doesn't send videos with gold-plated guns and tigers in the background. He moves through high-end hotels, lounges in airport VIP sections, and holds meetings in whisper-toned luxury suites. His empire doesn't run on fear. It runs on infrastructure. Let's pause for a second. Here's a historical nugget that stuns most people. By 2018, Southeast Asia's meth production had grown so large that some shipments were being stored in banana plantations, disguised as shipments of frozen food, moved in trucks with cold storage units paid for by front companies. Some traffickers even embedded meth into wax-coated tea bricks, smelling like jasmine, wrapped like souvenirs. and undetectable unless tested with high-grade lab equipment. And yes, the man who orchestrated it all, still flying commercial. Tse spends much of 2018 and 2019 in and around Bangkok. His preferred hotels? 5-star towers where bellboys nod and surveillance cameras are respectfully aimed elsewhere. His aliases include Chi Lop, Brother Sam, and allegedly several passport names tied to Taiwan and Hong Kong identities. He books under third-party agents, changes SIM cards like socks, never uses the same driver twice. His meetings are quiet affairs. No laptops, no phones on the table, just tea, small talk, and instructions wrapped in metaphors. You might think this is paranoia, but it's not. It's design. Tse has spent decades building a model that is built to survive him. Many people still think that he was hands-on with every decision, that his approval was needed for every shipment. But that's unlikely. What do you think? Is it really possible to manage $17 billion in annual trafficking and still know which truck leaves which port? Or is the real genius creating something that runs itself? Even as Operation Kungur tightens its grip, Tse remains slippery. Agents tail known associates across Singapore, Macau, Phnom Penh. But he's always one hotel ahead, one plane early. He books flights, then doesn't board. Or he boards under someone else's identity altogether. In one curious incident, agents in Thailand believe they've spotted him at a high-end restaurant. They mobilize quickly, get the paperwork moving, only to find that by the time the warrant clears, the man has vanished. The waiter remembers only that he ordered fish, tipped well, and wore a navy blue sports jacket. In the underworld, whispers grow louder. Some say Tse is untouchable. Others believe he's preparing an exit, laying low, liquidating assets, possibly retiring to North Korea or a private island near Palau. But Tse isn't hiding. He's watching as seizures increase, watching as old allies get arrested, watching as newer players get too loud, too fast. And more importantly, he's watching the legal systems in countries like Australia and the Netherlands, testing the waters for extradition risks. And yet, despite all this, he doesn't disappear completely. In January 2021, perhaps out of routine, perhaps because he's grown tired of running, Tse boards a flight from Taipei to Amsterdam. He uses a valid passport under his Chinese name. He doesn't wear a disguise, doesn't pay off immigration officers, doesn't even take a private jet. It's almost deliberate. Authorities are waiting at Schiphol Airport, tipped off days in advance. A small team approaches him at the gate. They don't need to wrestle him. He doesn't flee. He simply nods, says nothing, and follows them into custody. Tse is arrested without resistance. No chaos, no dramatics, just the soft creak of a door closing behind him. When the Dutch police search him, they find a few €1,000, a cell phone, and a charger. No weapons, no burner phones, no laptop. His suitcase contains pressed shirts, 2 novels in Chinese, and a bottle of cologne. That's it. But the name? That carries the weight of a continent. Inside the gray walls of a Dutch detention center, Tse Chi Lop finally finds himself still. Not in hiding, not in flight, just still. For the first time in decades, he has no movement to make, no quiet exits, no alternate identities waiting at the next checkpoint. His empire hums elsewhere, unseen, untouched, at least for now. The cell is Spartan. Fluorescent light hums softly overhead. The meals come in trays. A window no wider than his arm lets in a sliver of sky, and the chill of the Netherlands seeps into the cement. But Tse doesn't complain. He's been in worse. He sleeps well. Meanwhile, Across oceans and time zones, the news erupts. Asian El Chapo captured in Amsterdam read the headlines. Photos of Tse from years ago, some from grainy surveillance, others from passport leaks, start circulating. A face that once lived in whispers is now everywhere. But here's the odd part. Nobody can agree on who he really is. Is he a genius? A ghost? A scapegoat? Australia celebrates the arrest. The Australian Federal Police announced that his capture is the result of Operation Kungur and years of painstaking work. They prepare an extradition request immediately. Their case is built not just on the seizure of drugs, but on informants, wiretaps, financial records, and customs data, all orbiting the invisible gravity of Tse. The Dutch, meticulous as ever, hold him on the basis of an Interpol red notice. They follow due process. No leaks, no press theatrics. Tse is assigned a defense team quietly. The extradition proceedings will take months, but let's pull back from the legal shuffle. Because while the world debates whether Tse is a narco mastermind or just another name in the shadows, something else is unfolding. His empire continues. You'd expect chaos, right? A vacuum, gunfights in the street, but that's not what happens. Sam Gor doesn't implode, it adjusts, because that was Tse's design all along. He never centered the operation around himself. He decentralized authority, created regional lieutenants, and taught people not to need him. Routes are still running, labs are still cooking, chemicals still move from Guangzhou to Mandalay, from Bangkok to Melbourne. The infrastructure is too robust, too smart to topple overnight. That's the frightening part. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In 2021, despite Tse's arrest, meth seizures in Southeast Asia hit record highs. In one bust near the Mekong River, Laotian forces discover over 55 million meth tablets in a single raid, enough to supply an entire nation's addiction several times over. And it keeps coming. Trucks, boats, even drones begin appearing on the smuggling routes. It's as if nothing's changed. Many people still think that Tse's arrest was the final blow, that removing the head would kill the body. But what do you think? If you build an empire that can run without you, is that leadership or something more dangerous? Inside prison, Tse remains mostly silent. His lawyers handle the noise. They argue that the evidence is circumstantial, that he's a businessman, not a crime boss, that there's no proof he personally ordered anything, which, in a way, is true. Tse doesn't leave fingerprints. He leaves footprints so faint they vanish in the wind. Dutch authorities, polite but firm, deny bail. Tse doesn't argue. Back in Asia, murmurs begin to spread. Not panic, not rebellion, just curiosity. Where is Brother Sam now? In Macau, a mid-level lieutenant is seen distributing new burner phones to street-level enforcers. In Phnom Penh, a nightclub closes for 3 days, then reopens with a new manager and higher security. In Yangon, a former police captain disappears overnight. Nobody links it directly to Tse, but the timing, interesting. And in Hong Kong, an old friend of Tse, someone who hasn't seen him in years, receives a postcard, no return address, just a drawing of a lotus flower, no message. The friend burns it, just in case. You see, Tse's genius wasn't just scale. It was the emotional architecture of trust. He made people feel safe, important, understood. He remembered names, family details. He sent money quietly when someone's child got sick. He never raised his voice, but people obeyed anyway. One former associate said, he never ordered anything, but when he asked if something should be done, it was always already done. And now, that space he once occupied is becoming a legend. The extradition hearing drags on. Dutch courts examine the request carefully. Tse's lawyers file appeals, question jurisdiction, challenge the strength of the Australian case. They buy time, not necessarily to win, but to delay. Every day Tse spends in the Netherlands is a day not in an Australian courtroom, and possibly a day closer to a quieter resolution. Outside, journalists gather at the court steps. But Tse never speaks. He arrives in quiet suits, walks without handcuffs, nods politely to guards. He doesn't react to cameras, doesn't blink when reporters shout his name. He is exactly as he's always been, unreadable. And perhaps that's why he lasted so long, because you can't kill what you can't predict. Far from the sterile quiet of the Dutch prison, half a world away, the jungles of Myanmar breathe heavy with mist and movement. The super labs, those hidden drug complexes masked by tarpaulins and guarded by men in mismatched uniforms, continue to work. Generators hum like insects. Barrels of precursor chemicals bubble under makeshift shelters. Nothing has stopped. Not even the arrest of the man believed to have made it all possible. That's the unsettling reality authorities begin to accept in 2021. Sam Gor is leaderless, but not lifeless, because Tse Chi Lop didn't rule by fear or ritual. He ruled by design. What he built was a decentralized supply machine, a cartel that behaved like a tech startup. Regional partners knew their roles. Labs knew their quotas. Border officials had their price sheets memorized. The blueprint he left behind was so elegant, it didn't need daily management. It needed loyalty. And that, somehow, he had earned in spades. Let's take a moment here. Most traditional criminal empires collapse after a major arrest. The head goes down. The limbs start twitching. Allies turn. Rivals smell blood. But not this one. In fact, within 3 months of Tse's arrest, meth seizures in Australia not only don't drop, they spike. Record highs. Some of the shipments are bolder than ever. Hidden in bar stools, inside air purifiers, packed inside ceramic statues of Buddha, almost like a message. You got him, but we're still here. Back in Amsterdam, Tse spends his days in a measured loop. Light reading, legal meetings, and long silences. His lawyers, some Dutch, one Chinese speaking from The Hague, file another motion, this time challenging the validity of the evidence sourced from non-Dutch jurisdictions. Australian authorities, meanwhile, are confident. Their case includes intercepted phone calls, shipping manifests, and years of data linking Tse to the financial arteries of Sam Gor. But there's a problem. Tse's signature is nowhere. No emails. No phone records in his name. No cash deposits directly traceable to him. Everything was layered through shell companies, intermediaries, silent partners. His genius wasn't in hiding. It was in never being directly involved. One investigator from AFP grumbles. He didn't just wash his hands. He built a system that wore gloves for him. Meanwhile, the myth grows. A documentary crew tries to pitch a series on the Asian El Chapo. A Hong Kong tabloid runs a series titled The Ghost Boss. Reddit threads speculate on whether Tse was actually a figurehead, a stand-in for more powerful families in the shadows. Others claim he was merely the front for a more sinister Chinese state-linked operation. Many people still think that Tse had state protection from China, that they allowed his empire to grow because it helped control regional crime networks without dirtying domestic hands. But what do you think? Was he ignored or used? Whatever the truth, Beijing remains publicly silent. The real focus, however, is what remains of the Sam Gor syndicate. Authorities across the Asia-Pacific region begin targeting second-tier operatives. In Malaysia, a logistics officer tied to Sam Gor is arrested while sipping tea at a hawker stall. In Indonesia, a cargo firm suddenly shutters overnight, its owner vanishing without a trace. And in Laos, A small-town police chief is quietly retired after a raid uncovers $50 million in product. Still, none of them talk about Tse. There's a code, it seems, an unspoken vow. He protected them with systems. Now, they protect him with silence. Here's a chilling historical detail. In 2021, methamphetamines manufactured in Southeast Asia start appearing in new markets. South Korea, Bangladesh, and even Africa. This isn't contraction, it's expansion. The syndicate, headless or not, is growing. One theory? That Tse prepared for this, that he anticipated his arrest and left behind a transition plan, complete with prearranged routes and successor assignments. Another theory? That his arrest was staged, an agreed-upon sacrifice to ease pressure on the network. There's no proof of either. But isn't that the point? At a hearing in May 2021, Tse finally speaks, briefly. Through a translator, he says, "I am not who you say I am." That's all, no elaboration. But in that moment, the room tilts. Because even now, no one can truly say who he is. Not prosecutors, not journalists, not even the people who once served him. He had no tattoos, no gang nickname, no flashy reputation. He wasn't a killer, or at least not in the traditional sense. He was, as one agent described, just a guy who made everything work. And that's the most dangerous kind of man, one who disappears into function. After the hearing, he's returned to his cell. No cuffs, no words, just footsteps and another closed door. That night, rain falls on Amsterdam. Soft, heavy, persistent. Somewhere, a Dutch guard patrols past Tse's door and sees him sitting on his bunk, reading a worn book of Tang poetry. Not pacing, not praying, just still. Outside, the machine keeps running. By mid-2021, Tse Chi Lop has been in Dutch custody for months, and the world outside his cell begins adjusting to the strange reality that the man behind one of the world's largest criminal syndicates isn't vanishing into a black site or fleeing across borders. He's just waiting. He doesn't fight extradition with fury. He resists through paperwork, meticulous legal maneuvers, arguments about jurisdiction, questions over evidence admissibility across borders. His lawyers don't make emotional pleas. They speak like accountants reading from a ledger, and all the while, Sam Gor remains intact. The syndicate adjusts with eerie grace. The 5 major factions, each rooted in their own traditions, structures, and codes, move to stabilize. No civil wars, no loud betrayals, just silence and substitution. In Hong Kong, a man known only by his initials, KY, is seen visiting old Sam Gor contacts. He doesn't claim to replace Tse. He doesn't speak for anyone. But people listen when he talks, and shipments continue to move. In Vietnam, port officials begin noticing a subtle shift. Fewer bulk shipments, more micro-loads hidden in innocuous items, vacuum cleaners, dollhouse furniture, even baby formula tins with hidden layers. Tse's touch remains. He always preferred the long game. Here's a historical fact. In late 2021, authorities in Thailand seize over 1.1 billion methamphetamine pills in just a 6-month period. That's not a typo. Billion. That's more product than Colombia moved in cocaine in some peak years. And it's synthetic, lab-grown, and endlessly reproducible. And the best part? For the syndicate, it costs less than $200 to produce a kilogram of meth. Street value. Anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000, depending on purity and destination. Tse didn't invent this math. He just perfected it. Back in prison, he remained silent during interviews. Authorities rotate interrogators, change tactics. Some try intimidation. Others try subtle flattery. You're clearly intelligent, Mr. Tse. Why let others ruin your legacy? He doesn't bite. One investigator tries to appeal to ego. You built something historic. Don't you want to control the ending? Tse looks at him calmly and replies, "The ending was written before I arrived." Just 10 words, but they echo. Because by now, even the most seasoned cops know this was never about Tse the man. It was about Tse the method. Many people still think that Tse's gift was his ability to connect the Asian underworld with global markets. But what do you think? Was it really his vision? Or just his patience? His ability to wait, watch, and adjust while others chased power with noise? Because when you look closely, his genius was this. He never led in the traditional sense. He absorbed. He read people. He filled gaps. He made himself necessary without being central. And that is far harder to dismantle. Meanwhile, in Singapore, banking officials begin tracing shell accounts linked to defunct companies used by Sam Gor. One firm, Sky Blue Holdings Limited, was allegedly moving millions through trade invoices for fake seafood shipments. Another, East Meridian Logistics, had offices in Jakarta and a warehouse near Darwin, Australia. None of these businesses ever received direct payments. Everything flowed through invoice factoring, obscure payment processors, and digital ledger platforms based out of Dubai and Luxembourg. And still think this was a street gang? Authorities across Asia begin arresting second-tier logisticians and chemists. In Kuala Lumpur, a young man is caught with a laptop containing spreadsheets, not drugs. Each file details routes, customs agent codes, and loss tolerance percentages for various ports. He says nothing in custody, but the files tell a story, one he probably didn't even fully understand. Sam Gor isn't operating like a gang. It's functioning like Amazon Prime for narcotics. On time, scalable, and quiet. Even as prosecutors build their case against Tse, they struggle with one maddening truth. He never directly touched product. There are no photos of him near a lab, no intercepted calls with phrases like "make the drop" or "move the cargo." Just his presence in the shadows of companies, his name whispered in circles, his fingerprints missing from every scene but felt in every corner. That's why Interpol called him almost uncatchable, because even when he's caught, he's hard to pin down. In a Dutch courtroom, during a procedural session, the judge asks if he understands the charges. Tse replies in Cantonese, translated simply as, "I understand what you say I did." He offers no confession, no denial, just the faintest smile. Back in Asia, a small cargo boat docks in Manila. It's supposed to be carrying imported rice from Vietnam, but inside one of the false bulkheads, 500 kilos of meth wrapped in plastic bricks. The packages are stamped with a red scorpion logo, a known marker of the Sam Gor network, and so the pattern continues. No leader, no chaos, just machinery. It begs the question, how do you dismantle a ghost? Because if Tse never ordered a single shipment, if every move was made by someone else under a shared language of trust, how do you convict him? And that perhaps was his final innovation, not building an empire, but vanishing into it. By late 2021, while Tse Chi Lop remains in his Dutch cell with his lawyers grinding through the gears of extradition law, his empire, if it can still be called his, continues to hum along. But there's something different now, a shift, a quiet recalibration in how the organization operates. If the first wave of Sam Gor was built on consolidation, the second is all about adaptation. Back in Asia, shipments start moving in stranger, smaller ways. Instead of 300-kilo bulk loads, operatives begin utilizing multi-layered micro-shipments, a few kilos at a time, split across hundreds of containers. Meth concealed inside printer toner, synthetic opioids hidden in pressed tiles, ketamine tucked between the insulation of prefab wall panels. Each load, on its own, is nearly insignificant, but across the web, massive. This decentralization isn't panic, It's protocol, because Tse always knew the spotlight would turn to him eventually. Many believe he even planned for it. Built into Sam Gor's design was a post-leader protocol. Fragment, isolate, and continue. It's an elegant solution to a chaotic business. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, Tse's lawyers push a new line of argument that the Australian request for extradition lacks legal basis, given that no direct criminal activity was committed on Dutch soil. They also cite the principle of non-refoulement, quietly implying that Tse might face inhumane treatment if extradited. It's a stretch legally, but it buys time. Time which, according to whispers, Tse is using wisely, because even in captivity, messages still flow. A guard in the detention center reports seeing Tse receive occasional letters, some in Mandarin, others in Dutch. All are screened, of course. None are overtly incriminating. Recipes, poetry, updates from a niece in Guangzhou. But investigators suspect coded communication. One note allegedly includes an old Tang Dynasty poem. At first glance, it's innocuous. But to the right eyes, it may be more than just verse. Intelligence agencies have long known that Tse's network used cultural metaphors and layered phrasing to pass instructions. Moonlight over riverbanks might reference port schedules. A cold wind from the north could be a signal to reroute. Still, nothing definitive. Tse, as always, stays just inside the boundaries of deniability. Let's go global for a moment. In Japan, where methamphetamine has a long and strange history, used by kamikaze pilots during WE2, and still alarmingly common among working-class laborers, the product quality begins to shift. Seized samples test at 99% purity, a signature of Sam Gor Labs. Authorities there begin whispering a term, blue ice, a nickname for a strain of meth believed to be so potent it's almost pharmaceutical grade. And guess what? It's traced back not to Mexico, not to Eastern Europe, but to a remote lab near Mong Sat, Myanmar, just a few clicks from the Thai border. A former lab assistant, now in Thai custody, claims the facility ran like a clean kitchen, with Taiwanese chemists and Chinese supervisors. He never met Tse, but he remembers seeing a small portrait of him on a shelf, framed like an ancestor. He never needed to visit, the assistant said. We knew who we worked for. That right there, that's control without contact. It's the same pattern everywhere. In Cambodia, raids on warehouses uncover precursor chemicals stored under fake branding, barrels labeled as industrial degreasers or pesticide concentrate. In Laos, officers bust a trucking route using milk tanker trucks rigged with hidden meth compartments. In every case, the shipments are clean. The branding is precise. The documentation almost impeccable. And somewhere, far from all this, Tse Chi Lop sits reading a paperback, sipping tea that tastes like Dutch tap water and lets the world do the talking. Many people still think that someone else must have taken control, that a power vacuum at this scale would never hold. But what do you think? Is it possible that no one took the throne? Because the throne was never in one place? One UNODC official, when asked about the state of the cartel post-arrest, said, "If it was a snake, we cut off the head. If it was a hydra, we need more knives. But I think it was a cloud. You can't kill a cloud." That's the scale of the problem. And here's another chilling reality. As legal markets tighten, cracking down on certain chemicals, enforcing shipping inspections, Sam Gor pivots. They begin experimenting with new synthetics, designer drugs, synthetic opioids, even hallucinogenic analogs, because the future, they believe, isn't just in meth. It's in chemical flexibility. If a compound is banned, they tweak a molecule, rename it, repackage it, resell it, and say, He pioneered that thinking years before the rest of the world caught up. Even in jail, his influence remains, and that influence extends to reputation. Former associates still refer to him as the listener. Not boss, not Don, just the one who listened, who didn't judge too quickly, who remembered birthdays, who could sit for hours while others argued and then quietly ask the one question no one thought of. A cartel leader who never raised his voice. That's not charisma, that's design. And so, as 2022 approaches, authorities around the world begin to quietly concede something they won't say out loud. The man is in custody, but the method is still free. As 2022 rolls in, frozen rain taps against the windows of the detention center in the Netherlands. Tse Chi Lop, now a year into captivity, shows no visible change. His posture remains impeccable, his answers brief. He reads, occasionally writes. He eats what he's given. He neither complains nor engages in outbursts. He is the picture of patience, but outside his cell. In a dozen time zones and 5 languages, his legacy pulses forward. Like current through a wire no one can quite sever, law enforcement agencies begin to quietly acknowledge what they suspected all along. There is no singular command center, no bunker, no hard drive, no lair with a glowing map of ports and planes. The empire of Sam Gor exists in fragments, redundantly networked across borders and people. And its most powerful weapon isn't firepower, it's institutional memory. A meth shipment is seized in New Zealand, hidden in detergent packaging. The purity is over 97%, its chemical signature identical to seizures from northern Thailand. The route was familiar. Product packed in Laos, smuggled through Vietnam, disguised as industrial cleaning agents, then shipped through Malaysia with false customs documents before landing in Auckland's port. Same route, same process, but the shipment? Organized without a single traceable message from Tse. And this is what begins to truly unsettle investigators. The system is running on cultural code. It's not centralized command. It's learned behavior, perfected and passed down, like a criminal tradition, refined over decades. Meanwhile, in Sydney, authorities intercept an encrypted message chain between mid-level players. It's mundane on the surface. Logistics, port arrival times, payment schedules. But it ends with a strange note. Uncle is resting. His garden must be tended in silence. They know who Uncle is, but even now, no one breaks rank. Let's rewind a bit. In the early 2010s, when Tse was reportedly consolidating Sam Gor's structure, he implemented a philosophy borrowed from corporate governance. Redundancy equals resilience. Every process had a backup. Every supplier had 3 options. Every shipping route had a shadow twin. And most importantly, no one knew more than they needed to. That's why, when he's removed from the picture, the network doesn't crumble. Because no one has to invent the wheel. They're just keeping it spinning. Many people still think that the key to taking down Tse's empire lies in flipping lieutenants, catching a mid-tier operative who knows too much and is willing to talk. But what do you think? In a system where every lieutenant only sees one piece, how do you make sense of the puzzle? One former anti-narcotics officer from Thailand put it this way: Sam Gor is a machine built in fog. Everyone touches it, but no one can describe the whole thing. That fog begins creeping into the legal system too. As the extradition case drags on, Dutch judges face a dilemma. The charges against Tse are serious, the evidence long and winding, but the burden of proof must be clear. Tse's team uses this to their advantage, challenging the admissibility of intelligence gathered by foreign partners, especially from countries with weaker judicial standards. They're not arguing innocence, they're arguing process, and every delay helps, because the longer Tse remains in Dutch custody, the more complex the legal chess game becomes. Extradition requests from other countries begin to surface, rumored ones from Canada, possibly even China, though these are never confirmed. Each one muddies the waters, and all the while, shipments continue. In Indonesia, local police raid a meth lab built underground, accessible only through a hidden hatch beneath a chicken farm. They arrest 7 men, all locals, all trained chemists. One of them, during questioning, admits that he was trained by a man from Taiwan via a set of handwritten notebooks passed from lab to lab. Handwritten, as if even the training materials knew better than to leave a digital trail. Back in Amsterdam, a journalist manages to contact one of Chi's former business partners, an importer in Kuala Lumpur, who once co-owned a paper supply company with Chi in the 1990s. He agrees to speak on background. Tse never lied. That was his secret. He told you just enough of the truth to make you trust the rest. He didn't pretend to be someone else. He just never told you everything. The journalist asks if he was surprised by the arrest. The man laughs softly. Surprised? No. I was surprised it took this long. But worried? No. He planned for this. That planning is now evident everywhere. A group of mid-level couriers arrested in Bangkok refused to speak Che's name aloud during interviews, not because of fear, but out of respect. One calls him the garden builder. Another simply refers to him as the one who sees the whole river. It's not worship, it's recognition. Recognition that they were pieces in a machine of his making, and maybe still are. Because here's the question no one wants to answer. What if Tse isn't just the builder of the machine, but still, somehow, part of its code? What if the empire doesn't just remember him? What if it listens for him? By spring of 2022, Amsterdam begins to feel less like a holding ground and more like a stage. Tse Chi Lop, now in his 2nd year of incarceration without trial, remains the eye of an international storm, a storm that keeps spinning despite the absence of thunder. His extradition proceedings stall, restart, stall again. His legal team files delay motions with the precision of surgeons. Meanwhile, outside, the world keeps waking up to the machinery he left behind, and still, no one knows how loud that machine can get. In Canberra, Australian authorities grow restless. Operation Kumgor's crown jewel, the arrest of Tse, now feels like a trophy they can't quite bring home. Politicians quietly pressure the Dutch court system. The media starts asking, if he's the mastermind, where's the trial? Why hasn't the engine stalled? But the engine, as it turns out, has only grown more complex. In Malaysia, police discover a logistics firm operating out of Penang that appears to be shipping wooden furniture to various Australian ports. The shipments are clean, polished, paperwork immaculate, but inside the legs of one couch, $250,000 worth of meth, compressed and heat-sealed, hidden so well it takes hours with industrial tools to access it. They don't find Tse's name, not even a ghost of it, but the shipping company was incorporated in 2015, during the height of Sam Gor's expansion, by a lawyer who once managed 3 other companies, all of which dissolved within days of Tse's arrest. Coincidence? Maybe, but the pattern repeats elsewhere. Taiwanese customs uncover a similar method in a shipment of plastic pallets. The meth is suspended in a gel material that, when heated above 80 degrees Celsius, separates cleanly, leaving behind usable crystal and an otherwise harmless resin. Chemistry this precise doesn't come from basement labs. It comes from strategy, from planning, and everyone in law enforcement begins to say the quiet part aloud. Sam Gor is no longer just a criminal syndicate. It's a networked industry. Here's a historical fact that shocks most outsiders. In 2022, The estimated global methamphetamine market value reaches $80 billion USD, with over half of that traced to supply lines originating in Southeast Asia. It eclipses the entire GDP of countries like Sri Lanka or Luxembourg, and the fingerprints? Still faint, still Tse-shaped. Inside the Dutch detention center, guard's note says daily rituals. Wake up at 6:30 a.m., make his bed perfectly, eat breakfast in silence, read news, Dutch, English, Mandarin, exercise, write letters, legal consultations, tea. Lights out by 10 p.m. Never deviates. He speaks politely, never raises his voice, never talks about his case. One guard admits, he seems like someone who's not worried, and that's the most unnerving part. Because for all the resources deployed, forensics, surveillance, global task forces, nothing links him directly to post-2021 activity. The syndicate he supposedly ran shows no sign of decline. If anything, it's innovating. Vietnamese authorities, for instance, report the emergence of shadow ports, small, unofficial docking zones used to unload chemical precursors from Cambodia. These ports don't show up on maps, but the cargo, always precisely timed, always moving. And if someone gets caught, they vanish quietly from the network. Not killed, not punished, just removed, like a corrupted file in a clean system. Many people still think that Tse was a criminal genius, the architect of a billion-dollar enterprise. But what do you think? What if he wasn't just a man, but a language, a shared code of operation? What if Sam Gor was less an organization and more an idea? One investigator from the Philippines says it best. We thought we arrested the brain, but now we're wondering, was he just the first ripple? Even more unsettling? There are signs that new players are rising. In Bangkok, a mid-tier logistics officer is found dead in his condo, an apparent overdose. On his laptop, investigators find internal memos for a new group. The Fifth Line, a splinter network said to be developing alternative meth compounds designed to bypass current detection tech. In Tokyo, a gang that once reported to the Wo-Shing-Wo triad suddenly starts operating independently, using newer, more discreet delivery systems involving commercial drone fleets. And in Seoul, crypto wallets tied to Sam Gor holdings begin moving funds through decentralized exchanges, flipping millions in hours, leaving no trail. Is this evolution or succession? Because while Tse sits, seemingly still, the empire's outer rings are morphing into something more fluid, less structured, less visible, like ink in water. And maybe that was the point all along. Back in court, Tse's legal team files another motion. They argue that the UNODC's public statements in 2019, which named Tse as the leader of Sam Gor, prejudiced the case. That the media circus compromised the presumption of innocence. It's a long shot, but it doesn't have to win. It just has to slow things down. Every month of delay is another month the empire refines itself. A Dutch journalist finally gets approval to send a letter to Tse, asking for a statement, anything he wishes to say to the world. Weeks pass, then a reply. Handwritten, brief. A tree falls and the forest listens. But the roots, they have already moved. No signature. Just folded paper, creased once, delivered neatly. It's not a confession, not a denial. Just a message, and it says more than any court ever could. Summer arrives in Amsterdam slowly. The rain dulls to drizzle. Tulips bloom in rows behind tall iron fences. And inside the detention center, Tse Chi Lop continues his quiet routine like a man waiting out a long layover. Not pacing, not restless, just present. But beyond these walls, a new chapter in the syndicate's evolution unfolds. Because by mid-2022, Sam Gor doesn't just adapt, It begins to dissolve into the bloodstream of the global underworld. Not collapse, not vanish, dissolve. It's no longer just a name. It's a template, a replicable model, a way of doing business so decentralized and refined that rival groups don't fight it anymore. They adopt it, and that's the part the authorities didn't see coming. In Australia, small-time biker gangs begin mimicking Sam Gor's supply chain logic. No more turf wars or street-level posturing, just middlemen, flexible drop points, and burner phones with short expiration windows. A busted lab near Perth features a meth recipe that matches a Sam Gor signature compound line for line, down to the proportions and cooling times. In Taiwan, a seizure of ketamine leads to a surprising find, a shipment manifest bearing the logo of a dissolved Sam Gor shell company. But the senders? Local actors using old paperwork as camouflage. The lines have blurred, and in Europe, a small cluster of seizures in Antwerp reveals a strange echo. Hidden compartments in ceramic tiles, coded instructions in ancient Chinese idioms, and bank transfers routed through Vietnamese-owned logistics firms, each incident disconnected, and yet unmistakably influenced by Chi's playbook. It's not just his organization that's spread, it's his architecture. A retired Canadian intelligence officer puts it best. Sam Gor is no longer a syndicate. It's become a format, the PowerPoint for the next generation of crime. And as it spreads, the myth of Tse Chi Lop grows quieter, but heavier. Inside the courtroom, legal motions continue. Tse's defense introduces testimony from a Hong Kong-based trade consultant who claims Tse's businesses were legitimate, focused on freight forwarding and packaging supply. The consultant submits old invoices, copies of conference badges, and photos of Tse at logistics expos in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. In every image, he looks the same. Calm, dressed plainly, unremarkable. Nothing about him screams global narco mastermind. But that's exactly what makes him dangerous. Because Tse never trafficked in fear. He trafficked in efficiency. He wasn't charismatic. He wasn't flashy. He was quiet, dependable, and absolutely methodical. The kind of man who could sit through a 6-hour customs meeting in silence and still walk away with what he came for. And now, that quiet is spreading. In Myanmar, military unrest complicates everything. The Golden Triangle splinters under competing factions. But even amid chaos, the meth keeps moving. Jungle labs remain lit. Precursor chemicals are flown in via drone drops. Chemical tracking shows a new signature additive, one not seen before in Sam Gor labs. A forensic analyst raises an eyebrow. This isn't just a copycat, she says. It's a mutation. Tse's influence is no longer static. It's evolving. And what makes it worse? There's no center to strike. The labs are autonomous. The routes modular. The logistics teams freelance. The people arrested know little beyond their narrow task. One courier, caught in Indonesia, tells police he thought he was shipping parts for medical equipment. When asked who hired him, he provides a phone number that no longer exists and a Telegram account that vanished 2 hours after his arrest. The syndicate, as it stands, is now leaderless by design, and many people still think that this is the beginning of the end, that without Tse, the organization will crumble eventually. But what do you think? If you build a system that rewards silence, decentralization, and adaptation, does it need a leader? Or is the leader just the scaffolding you pull away once the structure can stand? In Bangkok, a former lab operator flips under pressure. His confession is rambling, inconsistent, but one quote stands out. "We were told not to look up, just forward. There is no one above, only the route ahead." That phrase is now being echoed in message boards on the dark web, as if it's become a mantra, or maybe something else. A sign that Tse's doctrine has been spiritualized, transformed into a kind of underworld code of conduct. Back in Amsterdam, Tse is moved to a quieter wing. not for disciplinary reasons, but because he requested it. He claims the new space allows better focus. His request is approved. In his cell, he receives books weekly, mostly philosophy, some business, a volume on the Silk Road. He returns each one neatly, with notes written softly in pencil on the inside covers. One note reads, "All rivers flow, but some know why." Another, "The map was never the territory." They're not instructions, they're not confessions, but to the men and women chasing shadows around the world, they read like echoes from someone who never raised his voice, but somehow filled the room anyway. And perhaps that's the greatest twist in Tse Chi Lop's story. He didn't vanish like a criminal. He redefined what vanishing meant. By late 2022, as Tse Chi Lop marks nearly 2 years in Dutch custody, an eerie realization begins to dawn across the global law enforcement community. The silence is not absence, it's momentum. The syndicate he once led, or perhaps simply architected, has not fractured. It's flattened, spread across borders and ports, terminals and terminals, operating like a distributed network with no need for a crown. The extradition battle, meanwhile, stretches on like an overlong shadow. The Australians remain firm. They want Tse in a courtroom in Sydney, where they can finally charge him for his alleged role in trafficking enormous quantities of methamphetamine into their country. But Tse's lawyers, clever and unflinching, continue to play a long game, delaying hearings, requesting additional discovery, contesting translations, and questioning the legality of intelligence gathered from countries where due process is less than robust. It's not a circus, it's a chess match. And Tse? He's the one leaning calmly over the board. Back in Asia, Sam Gor, or what's left of its original shape, has now fully entered its ghost phase. Where once there were meeting rooms and hotel suites, there are now signal apps and side-channel drops. Where once there were alliances, there are now trustless logistics contracts, single-use operators hired for a job and then disconnected like disposable flash drives. In Indonesia, port authorities bust a cargo ship with crates labeled as agricultural enzymes. Inside, plastic-wrapped bricks of meth embedded in compressed seaweed mulch, a method previously unseen. In Laos, 2 separate jungle labs are raided within a month of each other. Each contains chemical blueprints identical to Sam Gor's early designs, but modified, leaner, faster, more adaptable to local ingredients. The product isn't just meth, it's hybrid compounds, custom-tailored to evade current regulations. It's innovation, industrial scale, criminal innovation, and it's still eerily efficient. One officer from the UNODC says during an interview, "This feels less like we're chasing a syndicate and more like we're trying to quarantine an idea." The idea, of course, was Tse's real genius, not control. Flow. From ports to labs to people, he understood one thing. Everything flows. Money, trust, chemicals. And if you treat your operation like a river, not a throne room, it keeps moving, even when the architect is removed. Many people still believe that Tse is coordinating everything from his cell, sending out code through legal calls or written letters. But what do you think? What if he doesn't have to? What if he made himself obsolete? On purpose? Because here's something chilling. Interpol notices a drop, not in drug seizures, but in interceptable chatter. It's as if the syndicate has gone dark. No braggadocious texts, no coded voicemails, just transactions, cold, minimal, almost surgical, prepaid shipments, cryptocurrency exchanges, AI-generated packing manifests. Even some shipments now bear QR codes that self-destruct after a single scan. Sam Gor 3 Neuro. In the Philippines, a rogue customs agent is arrested. In his testimony, he refers to a new group he works for as the Map Makers. When asked who gives the orders, he shrugs. No one. Everyone. I just get coordinates. That line ends up on the desks of half a dozen intelligence units, because it sounds a lot like the future of organized crime, leaderless, digitized, and loyal only to the route. And back in Amsterdam, Tse receives a visit from a legal advisor. They speak Mandarin behind thick glass. The lawyer slides over a small file of updates. News articles, court summaries, timelines. Tse reads them silently, tapping one finger against the desk in rhythm. He doesn't react until he sees a headline about an encrypted darknet market called Lotus Hub, allegedly a new front for distributing synthetic drugs under the Sam Gor banner. Tse's only response? A soft exhale. And then, almost playfully, too poetic. It's the only comment he gives that month. A Dutch translator makes a note of it. They don't understand the meaning, but the tone is telling. Not pride, not worry, but maybe amusement, because Tse knew all along that once the machinery was built, it would sprout its own branches. In Hong Kong, an old associate of his, once a warehouse supervisor in the late 2000s, is caught embezzling funds from a logistics firm. He's interviewed, asked if Tse was still in contact with the inner circle. He laughs. Contact? No, he doesn't contact anyone. He doesn't have to. If you were taught by the monk, do you still need the monk? That quote circulates fast. The monk. A name the press begins to adopt. Not kingpin, not lord, just the monk. Quiet, methodical, present, even in absence. And slowly, even in the public eye, the narrative begins to shift. Not just a criminal, a designer of modern underworld infrastructure, a technocrat of shadow economies. And that's why he still matters. Because no matter what happens with his extradition, no matter where he's ultimately tried or how long he's sentenced, the shape of what he built remains. No one's trying to wear his crown, because he never wore one. He was the floor plan. As autumn bleeds into winter in 2022, the rhythm of the Dutch detention center remains unchanged, except perhaps for the rising quiet that wraps around Tse Chi Lop like a second coat. He walks the same corridor, eats the same food, reads the same stack of papers each morning. But outside, in the growing storm of surveillance and speculation, a truth starts to take root. No one really knows where he ends, and his creation begins. In Canberra, the frustration is palpable. Australian authorities, after investing years into Operation Kungur, coordinating dozens of arrests across multiple nations, still haven't managed to bring Tse to trial. They're prepared, stacked with intelligence, legal arguments, testimonies, but they're missing one thing: a direct act. There are surveillance logs, associates' testimonies, even cash trails that brush the outer orbit of Tse's corporate proxies. But no moment where he gave a command. No document with his signature ordering a shipment. No phone call intercepted that pins the needle in him, rather than the system. And that's the magic of the design, because the closer they look, the more Tse appears, less like a man at the top, and more like a ghost in the gears. Omnipresent, but intangible. In Vietnam, a new shipment of ketamine is seized. It's packed into vacuum flasks, wrapped in fake thermometers, and driven to the border by an elderly couple who swear they were delivering catering supplies. The manifest is flawless. Digital payments processed through offshore banks, all linked to a holding company in the British Virgin Islands that, naturally, was dissolved 6 days after incorporation. And tucked into the packaging, a printed note with 4 words in Mandarin. Do not look up. It's unclear if it's a joke or a warning. In Thailand, a warehouse raid uncovers a pristine lab beneath a fish packing facility. Everything is labeled with military precision. Even the chemical waste disposal is meticulous, suggesting environmental safety protocols unusual for an illegal lab. The lead chemist, arrested on site, tells police, "We were told not to poison the land, that the real profit is long-term." That doesn't sound like a street gang. That sounds like governance. In Singapore, financial regulators begin quietly flagging a rise in shell corporations formed around logistics and packaging firms. The structures look familiar. Minimal staff, vague mission statements, complex ownership trees. But the players? New faces, most with no known ties to organized crime. But here's the twist. The companies all seem to follow the same operational template, even down to invoice formatting and fake tracking APIs. The pattern smells like Sam Gor, only cleaner. The influence isn't just persistent, it's becoming doctrine. And meanwhile, Tse Chi Lop continues to wait. The Dutch court schedules yet another hearing, this time to consider the legality of some intelligence sourced via Thai authorities. Tse's defense claims that the evidence was obtained under unclear legal frameworks. The judge allows the argument, delaying the extradition proceedings yet again. One legal observer notes, "He's not winning, he's just not losing, and that's enough." At this point, even if extradited, Australia faces another hurdle, proving command over a machine designed to run without visible hands. Because here's a hard truth. Tse invented compliance through culture. He didn't need loyalty oaths. He offered predictability. Pay came on time. Shipments flowed. Disputes were handled without bullets. Risk was reduced. For many in the underworld, he offered something more valuable than power, structure. That structure now lives on without him. In Tokyo, gangland violence decreases, not due to police crackdowns, but because many mid-tier operators have shifted away from traditional rackets into synthetics and supply logistics, adopting methods mirrored in Sam Gor's rise. One investigative report calls it the Tse effect. When the underworld discovers that structure is more profitable than brutality. Back in Amsterdam, Tse is granted a small privilege, extra reading material. One book among them is an English translation of The Art of War. Tse returns it with only one underlined passage. When you surround an army, leave an outlet. Do not press a desperate foe too hard. What does it mean? A message to prosecutors? To the system? Or just a man rereading a favorite line? Many people still think that Tse's silence is tactical, that he's biding time, waiting for the right jurisdiction to crumble, or for a new legal loophole to open. But what do you think? What if his silence is not a weapon, but his final teaching? Because as the world chases the ghost of a man who once wove criminal coordination across continents, a growing number of his disciples are doing something Tse rarely did. They're innovating. In Cambodia, encrypted logistics apps begin popping up, custom-coded, peer-to-peer, QR-based. No usernames, no passwords. Just string identifiers and hash verifications passed between one-use burner devices. In Macau, money laundering routes once used by Sam Gor have been replaced with decentralized crypto nodes, rotating wallet addresses every 12 hours, often buried beneath NFT sales and gaming platforms. They're not new players. They're just graduates. The monk has stepped aside, and his students are building temples of their own. December 2022. Snow drifts against the window panes of the Dutch facility, soft and slow like the breath of a city half asleep. Inside, Tse Chi Lop folds his hands in his lap and listens to nothing in particular. There's no hearing today. No statement to prepare, just stillness. The same stillness he's worn like a second skin since the moment of his arrest. But outside, far from these sterile halls, his influence continues to echo, not as a command, not as coordination, but as culture. And this is the part that no one truly knows how to confront. In Australia, after nearly a decade of work, the teams behind Operation Kungur begin transitioning leadership. Some retire, Others move on to different cases. But the haunting truth remains. Tse was arrested, yes, but his capture didn't stop the trade. It didn't fracture the roots. It didn't make the rivers run dry. In fact, in some places they're flowing faster than ever because what he built no longer needs him. In Myanmar, a political vacuum has led to the growth of autonomous trafficking corridors. Routes that once paid tribute to Sam Gor lieutenants are now self-managed by local players who've simply adopted the systems that used to govern them. And yet, those systems look exactly the same. Identical labeling methods, identical shipping patterns, identical risk assessment strategies, down to how often to rotate drivers and which border guards to avoid on Tuesdays. In Vietnam, authorities intercept a shipment disguised as part of a fertilizer convoy. Beneath layers of ammonium nitrate are hard-packed bricks of high-purity crystal meth. But when analysts test the compound, they discover a new additive, a cooling agent designed to reduce thermal imaging detection. It's sophisticated, and it works. Where did that come from? No one claims it, but everyone knows where the method was born. Let's pause for a second. Here's a mainstream historical fact that's easy to miss. By late 2022, methamphetamine is officially Southeast Asia's most trafficked illicit drug, surpassing even heroin and cannabis combined. The sheer volume of seizures becomes so overwhelming that some governments stop publicizing them, fearing public panic or diplomatic embarrassment. And Sam Gor, at least in theory, no longer exists. Or maybe, like all brilliant designs, it simply dissolved into standard practice. Tse watches all of this unfold from silence. His name appears less frequently in the news, fewer headlines, less noise. Just the occasional mention when new routes are discovered, or a seizure bears fingerprints too well engineered to be first-time work. And yet the questions haven't changed. Who is replacing him? Is there a new boss? A shadow counsel? A silent partner? The truth increasingly seems to be no one. Because maybe that was the whole point. Back in the Netherlands, one guard notices that Tse has begun drawing in the margins of his books. Not words, maps, not of cities, not of countries, but lines, arcs, connections, little annotations, rain here and delay, better customs Fridays, north routes always recover. Not confessions, observations. It's not evidence, but it's haunting because it suggests one more thing. He's still thinking in flow, still seeing the world as ports, people, timing, temperature, and trust. Even without access, he's modeling the system, and many people still think that if he's finally extradited, if he steps into a courtroom in Sydney in handcuffs, it will mark the end. But what do you think? What if that moment means nothing? What if the moment of his arrest wasn't the climax, but merely the handoff? A wind down begins, not of the story, of the pace. Because as we close this section, maybe it's time to look at what Tse didn't do. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He didn't beg. He didn't vanish into a jungle compound or try to bargain for a deal. He sat down and let the river keep flowing. Across the ocean, in the fluorescent-lit war rooms of Washington, D.C., Langley, Quantico, and New York City field offices, agents of the FBI and DEA gather over whiteboards, laptops, and layers of red-stringed maps, trying to make sense of a name that slips between all of them. Tse Chi Lop. They know the stories, the whispers, the aliases, the roots, but every time they close in, he's already gone. This is the cold trail, not in the sense that it's inactive, but that it's frostbitten by precision. Tse doesn't leave the usual clues. No phone numbers traced to him, no email servers, no shell companies registered in his direct name. His connections, like veins in the body, pulse just beneath the surface, visible only when things break. And in the American playbook, this is a problem, because American law enforcement likes edges. a starting point, a trigger, a flare on a financial document, a face on a passenger manifest, a voice on a wiretap. But with Tse, there's only shape, the curvature of influence, a nudge here, a pressure point there, and no one's sure if he even cares about the US at all. In fact, that's what frustrates them most. He didn't target American cities. He wasn't flooding the Bronx with heroin or sending soldiers into Chicago. His empire was global, yes, but with surgical absence from the United States. The drug of choice in America was opioids and fentanyl, but Tse's syndicate focused on Asia Pacific, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, China, even the Pacific Islands. A world just outside American jurisdiction, but always close enough to matter. So, the DEA creates ghost files, cases without borders, labeled Asian DTOs, drug trafficking organizations, with TC's name hovering in the metadata like a suggestion no one's confident enough to say aloud. A joint task force is created between the DEA and HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. The goal is to track precursor chemical purchases, fund flows, and cargo vessel movements related to Sam Gor. They call it Project Seawall, but Seawall has a problem. Every shipment they trace leads them back to someone else. A shipping manager in Bangkok, a logistics coordinator in Penang, a banker in Macau, an importer in Fiji, and none of them mention Tse, not because they're protecting him, but because, as one agent puts it, they don't even know who he is. They're just playing their part in a system someone else designed. Here's a historical fact. In 2019, the United Nations declared Tse Chi Lop to be one of the top 10 most wanted fugitives in the world, comparable in importance to El Chapo and Dawood Ibrahim. But despite that level of urgency, the FBI had no direct jurisdiction, because Tse had been careful enough never to operate within U.S. borders after his early 2000s imprisonment. Yes, Tse had once served nearly a decade in a U.S. federal prison after a heroin-related conviction. But after his release, he never re-entered American soil, and so American agencies were left watching from the outside, trying to pull the puppet strings of allied task forces in Australia, Thailand, Singapore, and the Netherlands. One former agent says he wasn't just out of reach, he was out of context, like we were trying to arrest someone who wasn't even playing the same game. Tse didn't use burner phones in the traditional sense. He used proxy phones, devices that never left his possession, but routed signals through multiple SIMs and cloud overlays. Every time a trace began, it landed in Taipei, Kuala Lumpur, Hanoi, and Manila all at once. And when the agents tried to intercept financial trails, they found trade-based laundering schemes too complex for traditional software. A favorite of Tse's empire was the misinvoicing model. Declare $100,000 worth of socks, ship $5 million worth of meth instead, then balance the discrepancy through overpaid consulting fees via a dummy firm in Singapore. Multiply that by 500 companies and a dozen currencies, and suddenly, even forensic accountants are blinking. No wonder the FBI called him the silent engineer, because while the American crime narrative idolizes bold dons and violent crews, Tse presented a different archetype: the designer, the man behind the curtain, the system administrator of narcotics. Many people still believe that Tse must have had CIA ties, that he was allowed to operate because his network benefited broader political goals. After all, his organization helped stabilize criminal markets, replacing unpredictable gang wars with orderly, reliable trade. But what do you think? Did he cut a deal? Or did he simply master the art of being too useful to disrupt? One ex-DEA agent, speaking anonymously, said, "We knew he existed, but by the time we convinced ourselves to act, he was already gone. He didn't beat us. He just timed us out. And time, it turns out, is Tse's greatest ally, because the longer the trail stretches, the colder it gets. Memory fades. Staff rotate out. Cases lose momentum. And Tse, in his cell in Amsterdam, only needs to wait. He knows they can't pin him on a single clean offense, because that's the system he designed. Even when caught, he's not caught for doing anything. He's caught for being something. A symbol. A system. A soft imprint in a trade route that stretches over half the earth. And the FBI? They're still staring at the imprint, hoping the shadow will confess. There's a saying in the halls of covert enforcement. Every ghost leaves a reflection. Eventually. But when it comes to Tse Chi Lop, even the reflections are wearing disguises. By early 2023, global agencies admit what many field agents have long suspected. Tse's travel history is not a straight line. It's a labyrinth of names, nationalities, and soft disguises. He isn't the kind of man who dyes his hair, wears fake beards, or fakes limps. He's subtler than that. He disappears not by changing who he is, but by diluting it. One passport says he's Chi Lop Chang, a Canadian citizen born in Guangzhou. Another identifies him as a Hong Kong businessman named Sam T.L. Chung. Yet another, believed to be forged but never officially confirmed, lists him as a Singaporean logistics consultant working for a firm that hasn't existed since 2011. Each identity is just real enough to function, not to be scrutinized, but to slip through, and he does again and again. Thailand, Malaysia, Macau, Cambodia, sometimes for a day, sometimes for a month, always leaving a hotel receipt, never leaving a trail. One hotel manager in Bangkok remembers him faintly. He dressed plain, tidy, like an accountant, paid with cash, never asked for a receipt. When he checked out, the room looked untouched, like no one had slept there. He wasn't trying to vanish. He was trying to leave nothing behind worth remembering. Interpol's red notice for Tse, issued in 2019, includes his photo, aliases, birth details, and known associations. But the truth is, none of that mattered. By the time the alert was in circulation, Tse had already shifted again. His next move prepped weeks, maybe months before. This is the part that even the best trackers struggled to grasp, because Tse didn't move like a man on the run. He moved like a man who knew he didn't need to run. He'd built redundancy into his very existence. A web of identities, each with enough structure to function, but none tied directly to a criminal act. One investigator in Singapore remarks, frustrated, "It's like he understood the threshold of scrutiny and stayed just beneath it. Always. He never overstayed visas, never triggered high-value banking alerts, never used traceable electronics unless it was through second-hand intermediaries. Even his physical appearance was forgettable by design. Average height, average build, quiet mannerisms. No tattoos, no jewelry, no accent strong enough to root him. Just a passport photo that could blend into any customs line in Asia. This wasn't just evasion. It was intention. And when he flew, always commercial, never private, always economy or business, never first class, too visible. He once allegedly flew from Tokyo to Jakarta via a budget airline with 2 layovers. Why? Because no one expects the mastermind of a $60 billion drug empire to be sitting by the window on Scoot Airlines eating instant noodles. Many people still think that Tse used bribes to pass borders, that he must have had help. But what do you think? Is it possible that not looking like a threat is the greatest disguise of all? One of his former associates, now in witness protection, once described him as the kind of man you'd walk past in an elevator and never remember. In a world obsessed with surveillance, forgettability is power. This extended even to his habits. Tse never carried a personal phone registered in his name. He communicated through trusted proxies, people who received messages from someone who heard from someone. He once used an encrypted voice messaging system that required each participant to be online at the same time to unlock the channel, and even then, no messages were saved. When meetings happened, they were often staged in casual, crowded environments. Open-air markets, temples, hotel gyms, places where conversations sound like background noise, and where no one thinks to look for codes in the mundane. Even his luggage told a story. During his arrest at Schiphol Airport in 2021, Dutch police opened his bag expecting burner phones, documents, perhaps encrypted drives. Instead, pressed shirts. A copy of The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman. 3 black pens, 1 notebook with no writing. His fingerprints were there, but his presence wasn't. And that's the hardest part for law enforcement, because they aren't chasing a man. They're chasing a design philosophy, a way of being that leaves no pressure points, a system so light on its feet that it dances through red zones without tripping a single alarm. Still, the myth grows. Photos of him at airports are blurry, rare. Surveillance images usually catch the back of his head, or a figure that might be him passing through a turnstile. Facial recognition often returns false positives. One time, a tourist in Taiwan is detained because he resembles Tse. The man is 12 years younger, doesn't speak Cantonese, and is a software engineer on holiday with his wife. They let him go after 5 hours. Wrong shadow, wrong ghost. Because Tse Chi Lop doesn't just evade systems, he studies them. Understands how long each country stores facial scans, how long border footage is kept before deletion, which airlines run security through third parties. It's not magic. It's preparation. And perhaps most frightening of all, he was teaching others, not directly, but through structure, through repetition, through design so flawless, others began adopting it simply because it worked. So now, as authorities continue combing through digital records, CCTV footage, customs logs, and cargo manifests, they keep asking the same question. Where is Tse? But maybe the better question is, how many of him are there now? By early 2023, the net is tightening. Or at least, that's what officials from multiple agencies keep telling their respective governments. Task forces are in full swing. More arrests are being made, more raids, more seizures. And still, no clear collapse. The target has already been caught. Tse Chi Lop is in a high-security detention facility, detained under the pressure of international cooperation, and yet the flow hasn't stopped. Instead of crumbling, the structure adapts. Interpol, DEA, AFP, Europol, and intelligence services from Asia continue to exchange information in encrypted channels, conducting round-the-clock briefings to determine the future of what remains of the Sam Gor network. The name still haunts the case files, even though the organizational core has gone underground, or perhaps underwater. What makes it worse is that, as investigators dig deeper into shell companies, encrypted logs, and informant debriefs, one trend becomes undeniable. The system has outgrown the man, just as Tse likely intended. It becomes clearer with every day of surveillance. The machine isn't broken. It's simply learned to run in smaller gears. A single meth shipment intercepted in Melbourne traces back through 4 shipping companies, 6 transshipments, 3 chemical suppliers, and 2 trade finance brokers, none of which are directly connected. The operation is so fragmented that by the time authorities complete the paperwork to arrest the logistics manager, the next shipment has already arrived via an entirely different route. The syndicate has become Hydra-like, sprouting new heads faster than any can be cut off. Here's a concrete historical detail. In 2023, meth seizures in the Mekong sub-region hit another record high. That's despite years of pressure, Thousands of arrests, millions spent on cross-border security initiatives. The math doesn't add up, unless, of course, the system was never meant to stop with one man. And maybe that's why authorities begin shifting their strategy. They start calling it the mosaic, no longer a hierarchy, now a pattern, shifting, tessellating, rebuilding itself with new tiles as the old ones fall away. A decentralized criminal culture, shaped in the image of Tse's original vision, but no longer dependent on him. One Dutch analyst puts it plainly, it's as if the syndicate was never really a structure, but a standard, a template for others to follow. Now it's replicating faster than we can track. And in the middle of all of this, Tse, unbothered, he reads legal briefs. He answers in calm monosyllables. He makes notes in the margins of books, sometimes trade journals, sometimes Buddhist scripture. He speaks rarely, but when he does, it's in carefully selected metaphors. In one recorded conversation with his lawyer, he reportedly said, "When a tree falls in the forest, the soil doesn't stop growing, it finds a new root." There's no confession in that, but there's something else. Resignation, satisfaction, or maybe design. Meanwhile, in Bangladesh, a new trafficking route is discovered. Synthetic drugs, once exclusive to East and Southeast Asia, are now appearing on South Asian coasts, traced through fishing vessels operating under off-hours licenses. The packaging, familiar, triple-wrapped, sealed against humidity, labeled with coded stickers bearing numeric phrases that investigators suspect refer to old Sam Gor routing codes. In New Zealand, an unprecedented spike in MDMA seizures draws the attention of local police. The shipments are small but frequent, enough to suggest test routes for a new syndicate. But the customs forms bear the same formatting used by defunct Chi-linked front companies. Even the invoice language matches templates found on seized hard drives from a Sam Gor accountant arrested in 2017. Coincidence? Unlikely. The machine is still turning, but the language has changed. And this is where the agencies face their most insidious challenge, the diffusion of tactics. Because now, even groups with no known ties to Tse are adopting his logistics strategies. He's become the Steve Jobs of narcotics movement. Less a criminal, more a style of execution. Many people still believe that if they can just extradite him to Australia, put him on trial, put him behind bars permanently, the system will crack, that people will lose faith, that the flow will break. But what do you think? Is that justice? Or is it simply removing the architect from a city that's already been built? And would the city even notice? In Macau, a former casino manager under investigation for laundering once connected to Sam Gor is found operating a new entertainment venue. He's rebranded. His bank accounts are clean. But when he's questioned, he shrugs. "You think we were following orders?" "No, we were following a method. That's harder to erase." Back in Amsterdam, Tse is now rarely mentioned in the international press. The headlines have shifted. Focus now on cartels, crypto drug markets, fentanyl crises, and that may be his greatest vanishing act. Because what do you do with a man who no longer needs to exist? To be everywhere? You write his name on the indictment, but the system? It signs itself. At the edge of 2023, in a quiet conference room in The Hague, representatives from half a dozen international agencies gather over espresso and exhaustion. The topic, once again, is Tse Chi Lop, but more precisely, what to do with his legacy, because by now, they all agree on one thing: you can imprison the man. You cannot imprison the system he left behind. The arrest was a victory, no doubt. The footage of him being escorted through Schiphol Airport in plain clothes, face calm, hands still, was broadcast around the world. For many, it was a moment of closure, and yet, 24 months later, not only has the global meth trade not declined, but certain routes have expanded. New players have emerged. Tactics have become sharper, cleaner, more elusive. It's as if Tse's absence triggered a response, not a vacuum, but an upgrade. That's the word floating around now. Evolution. In Malaysia, a new trafficking ring is uncovered running product through mobile cold storage fish trucks. Each unit contains a digital padlock operated through time-sensitive QR codes that expire after 45 minutes. The drivers are paid digitally, instructed via pre-recorded voice commands. When arrested, they know nothing. No names, no faces. The lead customs agent writes in his report, "The operation felt like it was built by someone who read every mistake ever made in the 1990s. He doesn't name Tse, but he doesn't have to. In Australia, police seize a meth shipment disguised as cooking flour, so finely milled and chemically coated that only deep field testing uncovers the drug. The brand is fake, the labels flawless, and the packaging date printed in thermal reactive ink, invisible under normal light. These are not the moves of a sloppy cartel. These are the fingerprints of a standardized playbook, refined and passed down." A forensic analyst in Canberra says bluntly, "This isn't a gang, it's a curriculum." And just like that, the image of Sam Gor shifts again. It is no longer a syndicate. It is a school, a floating university of narcotics logistics, with chapters in ports and warehouses, labs and boardrooms, and Tse Chi Lop as its elusive, silent dean. Inside the Dutch facility, Tse receives mail with increasing rarity. His communications are monitored. His legal team, now well-trained in the art of strategic delay, prepares for yet another hearing extension. They've mastered the argument structure, jurisdictional complexity, evidentiary gaps, the difficulty of ensuring a fair trial based on foreign-sourced intelligence. At one point, the lead defense attorney reportedly says to a colleague, "They want him to be a monster, but he's just a man. It's the monster he built that they can't stop." And maybe that's the problem, because the monster doesn't need him anymore. In Taiwan, a retired triad enforcer is arrested during a bust of a suburban meth lab. During interrogation, he says something that sends chills down the spine of the officers. Say, he was just the first who saw what we all missed. That fear was overrated. That trust scaled better than bullets. And in Macau, another casino-linked courier is caught laundering funds through digital baccarat tournaments. The game software had been manipulated to skim transaction fees, and the fees were routed to shell accounts with names reminiscent of Tse's old firms: Southeast Meridian Holdings, Everbright Pacific Logistics. Different directors, same design. Here's a historical data point. By the end of 2023, analysts estimate that less than 25% of Southeast Asia's synthetic drug trade can be traced to specific organizations. The rest, fragmented, anonymized, encrypted, structured like a blockchain of narcotics commerce. And who set that precedent? A man who sits quietly in a European prison, never raising his voice. Many people still think that Tse's silence is a strategy, that behind his calm demeanor is a plan, a set of instructions, a master code waiting to be triggered. But what do you think? What if the silence was the plan? Because in silence, he taught more than any speech could. That power isn't what you wield. It's what others replicate in your absence. And that's exactly what's happening. In Jakarta, customs officials seize meth pressed into plastic floor tiles, then fitted into a shipment of actual construction materials. The smugglers never met. The supply chain was automated through messaging bots. The product was never traced back. The lab that made it, gone within hours of the bust, burned down in a controlled fire. When asked about who coordinated the operation, the surviving suspect just smiles and says, There's no one left. We all just know what to do. Back in Amsterdam, a junior prison officer, new to the facility, delivers breakfast to Tse's cell and tries to engage him. He asks, perhaps naively, "Do you regret anything?" Tse, looking up from a well-worn book of Chinese proverbs, replies with something that sounds more like a riddle than a confession. "The river doesn't regret where it flows, only the rocks do." Then he returns to his reading. The guard walks away, unsettled, because he realizes this isn't a man preparing a defense. This is a man who has already written the ending, and the rest of the world is just now catching up. When word of Tse Chi Lop's arrest first broke in early 2021, it rippled like a shockwave through the criminal underworld, quietly, without celebration. Because in those circles, among brokers, fixers, lab runners, and logistics men, there was no triumph, only adjustment. By early 2024, the ripple is still moving, but the water has long since stilled, and now the underworld listens differently. In Hong Kong, the murmurs start to resurface. Tse's name begins to float again, not shouted, not scrawled, but whispered in backroom conversations and under breath in after-hours lounges. Not because anyone believes he'll return, but because some wonder if he ever truly left. What happens when a man like that disappears from the board? The answer, it turns out, is not what people expected. Some feared collapse, others hoped for reform, but what they got was succession. Not through declaration, but through quiet inheritance. In Phnom Penh, a new figure emerges. Mid-30s, Cambodian Chinese, educated in Singapore, fluent in legal logistics. He opens a company that specializes in international freight forwarding for medical supplies. Invoices clean, staff well paid, reputation above board, until a single crate of pressure-sealed air purifiers, meant for Hanoi, is opened. Inside, 200 kilos of synthetic meth molded into the hollow panels of the machines. Not new, not sloppy. Identical to Sam Gor-era concealment tactics. When questioned, the young man doesn't flinch. He asks for a lawyer, then waits. By the time the authorities track the source of the payment that financed the shipment, the account is empty. The trail, like so many before it, vanishes into corporate fog. That's when it hits them. He's not the new Tse. He doesn't need to be, because now the structure produces its own minds, its own versions, its own architects. Tse didn't just teach men how to move drugs. He taught them how to move information, how to anticipate systems, how to weaponize banality. In Tokyo, a shipment of textbooks arrives from Taipei. Inside, the pages are real. But every 50th page is pressed with a micro layer of crystalline narcotics, undetectable unless the books are dismantled by hand. No one would have thought to check until a handler defected, sharing the tactic as part of a plea deal. And where did he learn it? A memo, passed to me at a hotel bar in Macau, said it was the 2020 archive edition, signed with a name I didn't recognize, but the formatting was familiar. That's the word that comes up again and again, familiar, because despite the hundreds of shell companies dissolved, the dozens of arrests made, the millions seized, law enforcement keeps finding something strange in every bust. A familiar layout, a familiar pace of operation, a familiar lack of chaos. And that's why they start calling it the signal. Not Sam Gor, not Tse, just the signal. A pattern within the noise, a method without a name, replicating across jurisdictions like digital code. Back in Amsterdam, Tse watches the snow fall again outside his window. It's his third winter here. A quiet anniversary. The guards have stopped trying to engage him with idle questions. They've learned he's not the type to speak unless there's weight behind his words. On this day, he's given an extra 15 minutes of phone access for good behavior. He uses only 5. He speaks in Cantonese. The call is routed, monitored, traced. The number belongs to a woman listed in one of his immigration documents from the early 2000s. A relative, possibly. The contents of the call are recorded but deliberately banal. The snow is light this year. I heard Guangzhou had rain. I hope the plants are still green. No code is found. But one analyst, experienced in decryption, can't help but note the rhythm. The cadence of phrases, the number of syllables, the order in which he says light, rain, green. It feels intentional, but that's Tse. Everything feels intentional, even if it's not. That's the final echo of his legacy. The sense that nothing was accidental. Not the flights he took, the identities he wore, the empire he shaped, or the silence he now keeps. Many people still believe that someone must be leading the trade now. A new Tse. A new number 3. But what do you think? What if Tse made sure there would never be another him? What if, by refusing to sit on a throne, he made the throne impossible? In Bangkok, an undercover agent intercepts a message during a minor operation. The target? A courier running fentanyl-laced pills for a network unknown to any major syndicate. The message reads, "No faces, no names. We are the route. The monk has already passed." That last line chills the team. They didn't expect it, but it's confirmation of something they feared all along. Tse Chi Lop isn't coming back. Because he never had to. He didn't build a cartel. He built a signal. And now, it's everywhere. Inside the sterile walls of a Sydney courtroom in mid-2024, the seat meant for Tse Chi Lop remains conspicuously empty. Because despite years of legal proceedings, extradition delays, and political negotiations, Tse has still not arrived. Australia waits, but time does not. While prosecutors rehearse opening statements and government officials issue hopeful press briefings, the machine moves, just as it always has, without him. In a sealed room within the Australian Federal Police headquarters, analysts review a fresh set of intercepted communications. Most are fragmented, broken into short phrases, image exchanges, QR codes, and digital receipts routed through ephemeral networks. One set catches their attention, a list of cargo manifest numbers, departure times, and temperature thresholds. Normal at first glance. But every fourth entry has an embedded character, slightly shifted, a font just 1 pixel off. When decrypted, a message. Do not await the monk. The page turns itself. They run it through linguistic filters. Nothing matches Tse's documented language, but the structure, the philosophy, feels like his fingerprints. Clean, detached, authorless. And that's the problem. By now, there are hundreds of people speaking in his cadence, mirroring his principles, quoting his methods, reproducing his silence. One senior AFP official off the record admits, "We're chasing a ghost story told by the people who learned how to become ghosts." Meanwhile, on the streets of Melbourne, small-time dealers have begun shifting back to older styles of operation. Less social media, more direct contact, more anonymity. The pendulum, once swinging toward visibility and tech-driven commerce, is swinging back to discipline. They call it monk mode. Quiet, cold, precise. Where did they learn it? Maybe from TikTok, or maybe from someone who used to work 2 layers down, from someone who once heard a lecture in a Macau cafe from a logistics man whose mentor knew a man called Uncle Sam. In Cambodia, a Canadian national is arrested for exporting powdered precursors used in synthetic drug production. He's not violent, not affiliated with any gang. His paperwork is flawless. The customs agents almost don't catch the shipment. Only a random inspection flagged a slight weight discrepancy. He cooperates, but he offers nothing, only one sentence. "I was just part of the calendar." And suddenly, agents remember a phrase from years ago, buried in a transcript of a wiretap back when Sam Gor was still just a theory. The system runs like time. We don't own it. We just know when the dates align. That line had been traced back to a logistics coordinator in Tse's orbit. But that man is long gone. So now the phrase comes back, worn and recycled, passed down like oral scripture in the underworld. Because if you can't lead with presence, you lead with mythology. Back in Amsterdam, Tse is moved to another wing. Quietly, no incident. His posture hasn't changed, nor has his manner. The guards have stopped trying to read him. To them, he's just a man who waits without restlessness. When asked by a prison psychologist how he copes with the endless delays, he replies, "The river never waits, it arrives." No further explanation, no elaboration. The psychologist writes it down anyway. Meanwhile, in New York, a small but growing academic circle begins analyzing Tse's operation not as a criminal enterprise, but as a case study in organizational resilience. They write papers on nodal hierarchies, silent governance, and criminal network diffusion post-extraction. One PhD student titles their thesis, "The System Without a Center. Lessons from Tse Chi Lop." He never responds to interview requests, but in their introduction, they write, "Tse may be behind bars, but the organization he designed behaves like an operating system, capable of updates, able to reboot itself, and functional even when one sector crashes." It's not flattery, it's observation. Many people still think that extraditing Tse will signal a victory, that putting him in front of a judge, under oath, will be the moment justice is served. But what do you think? If the system no longer needs him, who benefits from that spectacle? And who's actually sitting in the defendant's chair? Because by now the myth has split. There is Tse the man, and Tse the method, and they no longer live in the same body. In Laos, another lab is discovered deep in the jungle. The workers are teenagers. The compounds are synthetic. The blueprints for the lab's cooling systems are built using open-source schematics downloaded off the darknet and optimized with AI. But in the corner of one container, a scribble in marker, Brother Sam, 2008. It's old, it's irrelevant, and still it brings silence to the room. Because in a world that no longer needs leaders, the echo of one still calls the cadence. Tse doesn't have to speak. Everyone else is quoting him now. By the spring of 2024, whispers of Tse Chi Lop's influence begin circling Hong Kong once again. Not in back alleys or smoke-filled gambling dens, but in more subdued spaces. Upscale dim sum restaurants, shipping lounges at Czech Lapkok Airport, the back rows of real estate investment seminars. It's not a return. It's a memory, and memories, when powerful enough, start to behave like instructions. Here, in the place where so much of Tse's legend was sharpened, his silence now feels like part of the geography. The neon signs, the container ships sliding through Victoria Harbor, the finance towers in Central, they all remember him. Or at least the idea of him. That's why, when small players in the import-export scene start using phrases he once favored, officials begin paying attention. Clean bill, quiet tongue, smooth tide. No chaos, no credit, no cops. If the customs ask, say, holiday inventory. If they push, change the port. Nothing new, but unmistakably him. Because even after 3 years behind bars, he's still setting tone. An agent from the Hong Kong Narcotics Bureau overhears a mid-level trafficker refer to a 2024 meth shipment as monk clean. When asked what that means, he explains, "Means the paperwork is perfect. No flags, no delays. Just like the old man did it." They're still talking about him in the present tense. Back in Amsterdam, the extradition process has hit another procedural wall. A new motion filed by Tse's legal team argues that the original intelligence forming the basis of the Australian charges relied on third-party testimony gathered under duress in jurisdictions with unreliable due process. The motion doesn't aim to win, just to stall. The Australians bristle. The Dutch roll their eyes, but the lawyers know what they're doing. The longer he stays put, the more invisible the machinery becomes. In Macau, a veteran casino operator, once known for managing VIP rooms frequented by syndicate money launderers, rebrands his entire portfolio. His new focus? Warehousing, cold chain shipping, micro freight services. One curious detail: his invoices all feature routing reference codes that follow the old Sam Gor convention. 4-letter identifiers tied to port clusters, updated weekly. When asked during a compliance audit about the formatting, he shrugs. Just an old system we liked. Simple, reliable. That word again. Reliable. It was Chi's brand. Many cartel leaders relied on fear, on legacy, on firepower. But Tse built something rarer. Trust. Not in him per se, but in his structure. He made people feel safe. Not from enemies, but from chaos. That's why they still copy his model. Not to honor him, but because it works. Here's a historical detail you might not expect. By early 2024, multiple academic institutions in Europe begin cataloging criminal network management styles. Tse's model is now officially referred to as the distributed flow logistics doctrine in internal white papers, discussed alongside guerrilla warfare manuals and business case studies on Amazon supply chain management. That's the level of design clarity he reached. Even the scholars can't look away. One professor in Zurich, when asked about Tse, responded, "You don't have to admire him to recognize his system was 10 years ahead of the world chasing him." And what of Chiu? He spends more time writing. One guard notes he now fills small notebooks, not with manifestos or memoirs, but with diagrams, circular logic maps, branching paths, flow charts. At the top of one page, scribbled softly, "The river divides itself to survive." It's a line that resonates, especially as law enforcement in Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia all report the same troubling trend. Smaller, faster, smarter. Syndicates aren't just moving product. They're fractalizing, becoming copies of copies. Each crew adopting Tse's core values. Stay quiet. Stay useful. Don't be seen. Many people still believe he's playing the long game, waiting for extradition to fall apart, to be released, to return to power. But what do you think? What if the long game isn't about returning? What if the long game is already over and he won? Because in the old days, the goal was control, command, territory. But Tse played for something else. Continuity. And that continuity now lives in others. In Malaysia, a junior logistics coordinator is arrested and, in a moment of anxiety, offers to name names. When pressed for his highest level contact, he hesitates, then says, "I never knew who was above me. Just a procedure. The only rule was no panic. If you panic, you're not part of the signal." There's that word again. Signal. Not boss, not crew, not cartel. And so the narrative moves. Tse becomes not a threat, but an algorithm. An invisible strand of DNA inside a living criminal organism that no longer requires his approval or even his breath. And what does that make him? Maybe not the king, maybe not the monk, but perhaps something even harder to kill: the blueprint. In early 2025, a quiet directive is circulated among regional task forces in Southeast Asia. It reads plainly, "Stop looking for Sam Gor. Start looking for what thinks like Sam Gor." It's a subtle shift, but monumental, because for the first time in a decade, the problem is no longer a person, not Tse Chi Lop, not his lieutenants, not even a concrete structure with names and faces. It's an operating logic, a language almost, a pattern. In Bangkok, agents arrest a mid-level trafficker who has evaded surveillance for 4 years. He's calm during the interrogation, until they show him a series of logistics blueprints seized from a Macanese warehouse. His eyes widen, not in recognition of the design, but of the format. He says one word, Horizon. It's not on any watch list, but the analysts know the term. Horizon was the name of a small dummy firm Tse allegedly used in the early 2000s to test software routing for supply chains. It never moved drugs. It only moved dry goods, circuit boards, rice flour, replacement toothbrush heads. But the pattern? Flawless, efficient, invisible. Now, in 2025, that same pattern appears again in routes from Sihanoukville to Shenzhen. Same load balances, same stops, same 72-hour customs reset cycle. They start calling these reappearing tactics ghost limbs, as if Tse's system has phantom movements that still twitch long after the body was caged. And then it gets stranger. In Manila, a small cybersecurity firm accidentally flags an email chain bouncing between encrypted accounts with no subject, no sender. The body of the emails contains only shipment size, coordinates, 3 character codes, a quote from Sun Tzu. Every email is formatted in Courier New. Every email is sent at 5:43 a.m. UTC. There's no traceable source, just repeat behavior. Someone, something is still coordinating, not with flair, with discipline. The same discipline Tse enforced when he forbade excess, banned revenge killings, and insisted every major move pass 3 filters: legal risk, reputational risk, and network harmony. In Myanmar, a lab raid uncovers printed manuals, spiral-bound, cleanly labeled, protocol, flow delta, clean export practices. The documents are written in 3 languages: Thai, Mandarin, and English. They use Tse's tone, his phrase structure. And nowhere do they mention narcotics, but a few pages in, beneath a chart about optimal buffer stock for temperature-sensitive commodities, there's a diagram with concealed compartments in aluminum siding. No labels, no drugs, but to those who know the code, it's unmistakable. This is Sam Gor post-organism. This is Tse, not as a man, but as a methodological virus, a systems designed so clean, so reusable, that it no longer matters who sits at the top. In Amsterdam, Tse requests a new reading list. Among the books, a volume on the mathematics of swarms, a treatise on distributed intelligence in digital networks, and, interestingly, a history of the Jesuit missionaries and their decentralized approach to global influence. The prison librarian notes it, raises an eyebrow, but makes no fuss. Tse reads slowly in silence. During his daily walk in the courtyard, another inmate, recently transferred, tries to ask him a question. Something about the media, the stories, the Netflix rumors swirling around his name. Tse doesn't answer, but after a pause he says, "The camera never shows the system, just the actor." Then he turns away. Across the globe, in Los Angeles, a tech-savvy narcotics task force begins constructing a simulation, a predictive model of how Sam Gor-like systems might evolve without a core leader. The simulation keeps running off course. Every time they eliminate a node, 5 more form. The final note from the data team reads, "It's not a tree, it's a rhizome. Kill 1 stalk, the root system expands." That's the legacy. Many people still believe that the war on drugs is a matter of catching individuals, removing threats, collapsing hierarchies. But what do you think? What if Tse's arrest didn't end the story, but ensured it would spread without attribution? What if his final contribution was a blueprint designed to survive his absence? Because here's the truth hiding in plain sight. Tse never gave orders. He gave templates. He gave models that others could use, discard, tweak, and rebuild. He didn't need obedience. He needed replication. And now, thousands of miles away from his cell, in boardrooms, container yards, clandestine labs, and encrypted forums, his influence survives not in commands, but in calculated decisions made by people he's never met. In languages he may not speak, under conditions he could not predict. And still, it echoes, because the monk didn't build an empire. He built a language. On a chilly morning in Canberra, an Australian federal prosecutor flips through a 3-inch binder of evidence. Wiretaps, shipping records, seized messages, much of it years old, some faded, some redacted beyond use. This is the case against Tse Chi Lop, now approaching its trial window, or so they say, because the case on paper is massive, but in reality, it's ghost-built. Every brick of the indictment is tied to someone who no longer answers phones, or has fled jurisdiction, or has since reinvented themselves as a clean logistics consultant in Singapore, or a fisheries broker in Thailand, or an e-commerce advisor in Vietnam. And Tse? Still quiet, still behind bars in Amsterdam, still not extradited, still untouchable. He's no longer resisting. He's outlasting. Prosecutors are faced with a fundamental dilemma. They know they have the man, but do they still have the crime? Because the world has moved, the system has splintered, and the machinery they hoped would collapse with Tse's capture now runs like a self-healing code base, rebuilding every time they shut it down. One agent says, frustrated, "It's like arresting Alan Turing and hoping the internet goes away." Meanwhile, in Taipei, a private cybersecurity firm investigating dark web financial exchanges finds something odd: an isolated digital wallet receiving regular micro-transfers in the exact amounts of calendar dates. For example, 22.01 year, 03.03 year, 08.07 year. They chart the pattern for months, then realize these are anniversary payments, tributes maybe, commemorations of past shipments or lost figures, but no messages attached. Just precise amounts and cryptic sender handles. Mongsun 4. Gor no de. T Delta Mirror. No central source. Just rhythm. In Jakarta, a young man is arrested with a laptop full of freight movement algorithms. No drugs. No weapons. Just code. When questioned, he claims it's all open source. When asked where he learned it, he replies, "It was in the training pack." What training pack? They just call it monkload. Came with diagrams, time protocols, decoy layering. Everyone uses it now. It's a kit, a downloadable, teachable system for trafficking, a methodology that doesn't name Tse, but breathes his logic. Law enforcement agencies across Vietnam, Laos, and Malaysia begin encountering references to the monkload in seized Telegram channels. It's not centralized, and no two versions are the same, but every crew arrested seems to know how it works, and in every version, there's a core value list. Don't improvise, don't threaten, never explain, always reroute. If it breaks, let it die. If it lives, let it teach. These are not just rules, they're philosophy. And this is where it all starts to change. The system has evolved from command to culture, and once something becomes culture, it can no longer be imprisoned. In Seoul, a crime analyst gives a presentation titled Network Integrity After Leader Extraction, and notes the following. Most transnational cartels collapse post-arrest, but this one restructured faster than any in recorded history. We believe it had a built-in succession code, or perhaps no throne to begin with. He ends the slide with a simple statement: no king, just current. And back in Amsterdam, Tse receives a letter. The return address is blank. The contents are a folded sheet with a single sentence. The page turned. He burns it in his cell toilet. Says nothing to the guards. Just flushes, dries his hands, and goes back to reading. The trial still looms, but no one truly believes that a conviction will change the tide, because this is no longer about a courtroom, no longer about borders, no longer about Tse. This is about the replication of structure. Many people still hope that if Tse is convicted, if he's sentenced, if he vanishes into a maximum security unit somewhere in Victoria, it'll send a message that people will stop, that fear will spread. But what do you think? What if the message is already out there? And what if it doesn't need Tse's name at the bottom to be signed? Because as the winds shift and the task forces lose footing, the blueprint holds. The syndicate is now language. not leadership. A whispered rhythm, not a shout. And Tse? He's not free, but neither is he needed. He was the architect of a code base, a monk with a spreadsheet, a whisper with a map. And now, he's the man who vanished from relevance by making himself unnecessary. In the dead quiet of a late April morning in Amsterdam, Tse Chi Lop wakes at his usual hour, 4:45 a.m., no alarm needed. He sits upright, breathes in, breathes out. The cell is exactly as he left it the night before. The small notebook still face down on the desk, a library-issued copy of The Art of War under the pillow, and a single black pen tucked behind a worn paperback on urban logistics. The guards know his rhythm now. He never asks for extra time in the yard. He never complains about food. He never initiates conversation, but each morning he walks. Exactly 38 minutes, clockwise around the perimeter of the concrete courtyard. Not hurried, not hesitant, measured. In Melbourne, the court finally sets a tentative trial date. But by now, everyone knows it's ceremonial. The weight of the case no longer sits on whether Tse is proven guilty. It sits on whether anyone still needs him to be. Because while the court prepares, the machinery continues. In Chiang Rai, a truck is stopped with a shipment of gelatin sheets for food processing. Inside the insulation, agents find packets of trimethylphosphine, a precursor banned across multiple jurisdictions. The shipment uses codes from a warehouse once tied to Tse's Singapore logistics firm, but the firm dissolved in 2011. In Rotterdam, a customs agent notices a 40-foot container marked as audio parts, but with a weight signature that doesn't match prior manifest logs. Inside, stacks of fake speakers, each molded around vacuum-sealed capsules of synthetic opioids. The export form matches Tse's old formatting style. Left justified labels, sans serif typeface, reference codes tied to lunar calendar dates. But when they trace the paperwork, it leads nowhere. A shell company with a shelf life of 40 days, then poof, like it was designed to exist just long enough to work. And that's the thing. These aren't coincidences. They're breadcrumbs left behind by a ghost who knew how to write himself out of history, not to vanish but to repeat. You might remember back in Section 5 when Tse gave his first major directive in Macau. No more flashy violence, no more chaos. That wasn't just about safety. It was about quiet sustainability. Tse knew from the beginning, war draws attention. Systems survive in silence. He wasn't building a dynasty. He was burying an algorithm. Now, from Amsterdam, he watches it grow, without his hand, without his voice, without his name. And maybe that was the point all along. In Tokyo, a logistics broker is asked during a sting operation why his routing system mimics outdated narcotics patterns. He shrugs. I thought that was just the industry standard. That's what Tse has become. Standard. Not exceptional, not feared, just assumed. In Brussels, an international conference on organized crime and AI-generated logistics includes a panel titled Sam Gor Without Sam, The Future of Leaderless Networks. The slide deck contains no photo of Tse, only a diagram, a circle with no center. Many people still insist Tse should pay, that justice must be served, that an empire like Sam Gor must answer to courts, to families, to the nations harmed by its trade. But what do you think? What if justice arrived 3 years ago, in the form of a man locked away, already obsolete, already outlived by his own method? And what if that man, rather than resist, smiled? Because back in his cell, Tse sits once again at the small desk. The guards watch through the window. He doesn't notice, or pretends not to. He opens the notebook, flips to the back, a blank page. With steady fingers, he writes a single line, then closes the cover. We don't know what he wrote. The guards never looked. But one of them later said, off record, he looked finished, not defeated, like someone who'd written the final code, closed the terminal, and let the program run. And maybe that's what this story has been all along. Not a rise and fall, but a handover. Not a legend, but a syntax. Not Tse Chi Lop, but what he taught the world to whisper. So now, as the last echoes of Tse's footsteps fade into the soft hum of Amsterdam's morning, we return to stillness. Not the kind that arrives with justice or victory, but the kind that lingers after a whisper has left the room. That soft, drifting quiet, the kind that wraps itself around your thoughts when the lights dim and the pace slows. Tse didn't shout his story. He didn't demand attention. He taught others to move without sound, to operate like mist, seen only when you know where to look. And now, as you lie there, eyes closed or half-lidded, letting the last images settle into the background of your mind, consider the strange peace that comes from systems without faces. They're dangerous, yes, but also oddly calming, predictable, rhythmic. And maybe that's what sleep is too. A surrender into systems we don't fully understand. The rhythm of breath, the freight of memory, the signal in the dark. Let Tse's tale drift out the back of your mind now. Let the machinery go quiet. Let the signal soften into static, and then fade completely. There's nothing left to chase. The river has already passed. You're safe. You're warm. You're here.